Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto has the Namikaze Doujutsu part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Sleep didn't seem to be coming easily. It wasn't exactly surprising, considering the events that had taken place only hours before. After all, it wasn't every day that you learned that you had one of the most powerful entities in existence sitting in your belly. Just hours ago, he had learned that he was the container for the Kyuubi no Kitsune. In a way, it wasn't nearly surprising as it should have been. In fact, if anything, it made him happy. It served to explain so much about the young nin's life, and the hell of loneliness that he had endured for so long. The stares, the whispered, and not so whispered comments behind his back, and even to his face, calling him a monster and a scourge, among other, more colorful adjectives. Yes, happy was about the closest emotion that he could attribute to his mood right now, but it didn't exactly describe his exact state of mind. No, to describe that, you'd have to look up the word pissed in the dictionary. Naruto stared at his alarm clock, which read exactly 2 a.m. and let out yet another sigh. The whole situation was fucked up. Just plain fucked up. The more he thought about it, the more he became agitated, and even angry. Not at himself, and not really the Kyuubi but at the village. It was a dangerous line of thinking, and Naruto didn't really want to dwell on it, but every time he tried to push it to the back of his mind, it popped up again, unbidden. They knew. They fucking knew. The village as a whole, at least those above the age of 14 or 15, knew that he was the container for the Kyuubi. They knew that the Kyuubi was sealed into Naruto. The Kyuubi wasn't transformed, he wasn't somehow given a random human image and a human body, and some sort of uncanny acting ability to act exactly like a human. For all this time he was sealed into a human, and that human was just that human. Regardless of this little tidbit of information, they still treated him like trash. No, they treated him lower than trash. They treated him as some form of life that didn't even deserve existence, let alone the ability to pursue the daunting task of being a human child. Pushing away that train of thought, Naruto focused on the more positive aspects of the night, what few there were, anyway. The night hadn't been all bad. He'd helped root out a traitor, he'd mastered a Jounin level forbidden technique, saved his sensei from sure death, and on top of all that, he'd managed to graduate. It was strange though. Mizuki, who was obviously a traitor to the village, would probably get more general respect than Naruto would, even after no, especially because of this incident. After all, Mizuki had simply tried to kill the village's little monster boy, and he was simply grieving, or some such tripe at least. That's probably how the council would see it. They were always harping on him about something or another. Luckily, Sarutobi stood in the way between them and him. He made a mental note to buy his surrogate grandfather some ramen at Iruka sometime. Naruto sighed again, for what felt like the 100th time. The more and more he thought about it, there were precious few reasons for him to stay loyal to this abhorrent village, let alone fight for it save for the one promise he had made to the Sandaime. He had promised, when he was still young, oblivious, and impressionable, that he would become a ninja of Konoha. What's more, he had promised to the old man that he would protect the village with his life. Naruto was many things, but among them, he was not someone who broke promises, even when there was a tremendous reason why he should. It simply didn't work that way. That didn't necessarily mean that he would fight for the village, though. There was no real reason for him to fight for anyone that lived in Konoha, save for the very, very short list of people that he considered to be precious to him. The Sandaime was easily at the top of that list, followed closely by the owners of Ichiraku Ramen, Iruka, and followed very, very distantly by Uchiha Sasuke, simply because he was one of the first people to ever truly acknowledge his existence beyond that of simply, that boy. Naruto glanced at his alarm clock again, and silently cursed. It was almost 3 a.m. now, and tomorrow he would be getting assigned teams. He needed sleep, and he needed it badly. He had to be at the very least awake tomorrow during the team assignment ceremony, and he wanted to be at least somewhat prepared for whatever came after that. It never really hurt to be prepared. Something clicked inside of Naruto's mind. If he couldn't find sleep, then perhaps he could find meditation. Sitting up, and positioning himself in a cross-legged stance on his bed, he closed his eyes, and began to do. On second thought, Naruto had absolutely no idea how to meditate. All he knew was that you had to get in some stupid cross-legged position, close your eyes, and do something like centering yourself, or calming yourself, or something like that. Of course, he had absolutely no idea what the hell that meant, only that he had seen something like it on TV, or seen someone do it once. He had no real clue how he was supposed to. Naruto's train of thought was interrupted by what sounded like a low grumble emanating from his head, and then a sharp, excruciating pain that hit him in both his stomach and in the back of his head at the same time. Naruto thought that perhaps he was under attack, until he noticed that there was truly no one else with him. The pain increased in both intensity and volume, and as Naruto saw a slight red aura envelop his body, his mind began to drag him into unconsciousness. The first thing he noticed was the smell. It smelled like fear. Scratch that. It practically reeked of fear or something that sought to induce it. Naruto wasn't entirely sure that fear would produce a smell, but if there were to be a smell attributed to fear, this would be it. Naruto got up and surveyed his surroundings. It looked to be a sewer of some kind, and there looked to be pipes and conduits all over the place, as well as a thin layer of water covering the ground. On either side of him were what looked like passages. As he walked on, he could make out that some of these passages had doors with extremely tight padlocks, and others simply became dead ends. However, as he neared the end of the hallway he was in, he surveyed one passage that ended in a bright flash of light that blocked anyone from seeing past it, without first entering it. It was really the only path available. He stumbled down the hallway, and as he stepped into the light, he could vaguely make out what looked to be a gate. Walking closer, the light, quite suddenly, was no longer obscuring his vision, having seemingly melted behind him. Yes, it was certainly a gate. A gate with intricate patterns carved out along the bars, and a flimsy piece of paper in the middle, with the kanji for seal written in the middle. Everything beyond the gate, however, was pitch black, and no matter how much Naruto strained, he couldn't see what might be beyond it. That particular quandary was quickly answered, however. As Naruto approached the bars, a smiling, and particularly terrifying visage made itself known to Naruto, and as much as he wanted to back away from the bars, he found that his legs had suddenly seemed to stop obeying his mind. What a terrible time for insubordination. Both Naruto and the entity stared at each other for what seemed to be forever, before the frightening visage broke the stalemate and began laughing. It was a deep, bellowing laugh that was quite possibly the most evil-sounding thing that Naruto had ever heard in his life, and yet, it carried an undertone of mirth to it that was quite hard to ignore. It was confusing, to say the least. Naruto was about to voice his confusion to whatever it was when the visage began speaking. The look on your face was absolutely priceless. I haven't seen a look like that on anyone's face for a long time. Naruto was now more perturbed than anything, and was about to speak up, again, when he was interrupted again. The entity behind the bars let forth a sound like an exasperated sigh. Undoubtedly, you're wondering just where you are, who I am, and why you are here, right? Before Naruto could respond in the positive, the entity continued. Well, the answer to the first two is rather simple. We are in your mind, and I am, of course. The entity puffed out its chest. The great Kyuubi no Kitsune. Silence. Naruto coughed, as did the Kyuubi. Kyuubi continued, as his declaration seemed to fall flat. It grumbled slightly. As to exactly why you're here, well, that is going to take considerably more explanation. Here, the fox seemed to pause in contemplation. Naruto waited for quite some time and allowed the first bit of information to sink in. He was talking to the Kyuubi. What's more, he was somehow corporeal within his own mind. It didn't make a tremendous amount of sense, but he couldn't really chalk it up to being some sort of bad dream or anything. It was too lucid for that, so, for the moment, he accepted the fox's explanation. Naruto waited for the fox to begin again, but when it seemed as though no explanation was forthcoming, he decided to take the initiative, and this time, he was not going to be interrupted. Well? I'm in my mind, and I'm talking to a bastard demon fox. Now, why am I talking to you? Naruto gave the fox his best angry glare, but against something that reeked of malice like this, it didn't really do much. Not to mention the fact that the fox looked even more amused than he did before. Impatient, aren't we? He chuckled. Then again, when you have the lifespan of a human, I suppose time would be at a premium, wouldn't it? He sighed. I wouldn't worry about it. Although you're talking to me in here, the time that is passing out there in the real world is going considerably more slowly than it is in here. After all, even though you may be dense, the mind does move faster than the body. Kyuubi laughed boomingly. Besides, this gives us more than enough time for the rather lengthy conversation we are about to have. Naruto gulped just slightly after the fox said lengthy. It certainly didn't bode well for whatever it was that the fox wanted to talk about. The fox sat down on his haunches, licking its chops and breathing shallowly, as if fully at rest. Simply put, now that you actually know of my existence, it's time that both you and I attempt to make the best of this rather unfortunate situation. Before, I had the luxury of being able to simply sleep my days away and plot various dastardly things that I would do when or if I ever managed to escape this horrible prison. However, now that you know I'm here, undoubtedly, you're going to get into a situation where you'll call upon my power, either consciously or not. As such, I propose that we make a deal. Or rather, several deals, regarding my situation, as well as your situation out there. Kyuubi leaned down so that his nose was very close to his own. It was intimidating as hell, if he were honest with himself. You see, I know much more about you than you do about me. During the time I've been cooped up in this infernal cage, I've been able to observe both your life and your bodily processes, and I've been able to concoct a rather fortunate deal that will, in the end, make both of us more happy. At this, the Kyuubi paused for a moment, allowing Naruto to absorb what the Kitsune had just said. Call upon the fox's power? Deals? Being happy? If the fox had been observing his life, then surely he had to know that it hadn't exactly been fun. He quietly prayed that the fox had an empathetic nerve somewhere in his body. Naruto made a smart decision for once in his life, and simply plopped himself down on the cold ground of the cell, falling quiet to listen to whatever it was that the fox was proposing. The fox, again, sat back on his haunches. Good boy. Naruto glared petulantly, and Kyuubi just laughed but continued soon after. Since you are obviously at a disadvantage here, information-wise at least, I'll start off with a few acts of good faith. The first things you should know are its side, muttering something about clichés, predictably, about both my deductions regarding your family line, and the purposes of the seals, yes, seals, plural, that were placed on you when I was sealed into you. At the word family, Naruto scrambled up and stared wide-eyed at the visage in front of him, eyes slightly quaking in both apprehension and barely contained anticipation. Naruto had wanted to know, dreamed of having a family, or, at the very least, knowing who his family was, for as long as he could remember. It was one of the things in life that he wanted more than anything else, and this fox was willing to tell him who his parentage was, even when others wouldn't. Naruto wasn't entirely sure whether he should be thanking the fox, or cursing those who had withheld the information of his heritage from him for so long. Perhaps he should be doing both. You know who my family was? I'm not going to ask how or anything, but please, just tell me. Naruto was beside himself at this point. He didn't care about any of the consequences, he had to know, and he would give almost anything to know. The fox merely smiled, not a tremendously evil smile either, but one that seemed at least somewhat genuine as a smile from an evil fox demon can get, anyway. Oh, but how I know is as much a part of the story as the information itself is. The fox seemed to contemplate his words again, and then faced Naruto with his normal look back in place. The next words out of the fox demon's mouth, however, were as unexpected as his actions. Understandably, this form I have right now is undoubtedly a hindrance to our continued conversation. Hold on for a few moments, while I slip into something more comfortable. The fox seemed to chuckle slightly at this, and Naruto saw the visage disappear. For a few minutes he simply sat there, his mind a comfortable blank, until something he certainly didn't expect to see walked right back up to the bars of the cage. It sat down directly parallel to Naruto on the other side of the virtual gulf that separated them. She was gorgeous. By any standards of the word, the being that sat in front of Naruto was the very picture of beauty and grace. She had bright, dazzlingly red hair that flowed down to the middle of her back as a waterfall might cascade off of a mountain top. Her skin was a pale alabaster, and her face was a visage of femininity. It gently curved down the sides and sloped perfectly in all the right places. She had whisker marks, just as Naruto did, just thicker, and her eyes were a burning red with vertical, slitted pupils that reminded Naruto very much that this beauty sitting in front of him was the Kyuubi no Kitsune. She wore a dark maroon kimono with pink sakura petals adorning it as if they were falling. The kimono didn't show off much, however it served to accentuate her curves almost perfectly, almost as if it were a second skin. This was all accentuated by a bright red, flower-patterned obi tied in a bow in the back around her midsection. What Naruto's eyes were inextricably drawn to, however, was what adorned her neck. What looked to be a jet-black collar was around her neck, with blood-red kanji written on it that Naruto couldn't quite discern from his vantage point. For whatever reason, it fascinated Naruto to look upon it, and only when Kyuubi cleared her throat did Naruto return to his senses. Now that he had his senses about him once again, he noticed something else about the girl in front of him. She looked to be no older than Naruto. She was developed, yes, but not overly so, and she was only a few inches taller than Naruto. Her facial features as well as certain curves about her didn't really seem to make her look any older or any younger than Naruto himself. Naruto was now curious. Why is it that you don't look any older than me? I mean, you're like thousands of years old, right? Naruto gave the Kyuubi a quizzical expression as he asked the question, but she just scoffed. This time, when she spoke, it was no longer that booming, ethereal voice that she held before, but rather a very feminine, alto-pitched voice that sounded as though she could be any girl of 12 or 13. It still held an undercurrent of something though that made it sound authoritative. I look this old, because this is how old I choose to make myself. I am after all, a pseudo-immortal being, and I can choose to make myself look as old or as young as I need to be or want to be. It's one of the perks of being what I am. At this, Naruto seemed to gain a look of almost understanding on his face, and adorned what could be construed as a smile on his face. Amazing, who would ever think that the Kyuubi would be a chick? All that destruction and stuff, and the deep booming voice coming from a girl. At this, Naruto began laughing rather hard, and a vein on Kyuubi's forehead grew to epic proportions. She sounded pissed off, but far less intimidating than before. Of course, society would think that it was a male causing all of this destruction after all. That's pretty much all they're good for aside from reproduction. Naruto stopped laughing and gave Kyuubi a puzzled expression. Was that an insult? Yes. Oh, you're not very good at those, are you? You know, I could just boot you out of here, and never tell you what you want to know. Naruto scrambled to his prior position, sitting down quietly, or not so quietly, as it were. What? No. No, keep going, please, I'll shut up. Kyuubi smirked. Good. You're learning. Now, hold still and listen well. The boy did what he was told, and Kyuubi noted his facial expression, one of rapt attention and barely contained excitement. She took it as a cue to begin her explanation. As I said before, the reason behind me knowing who your family is, or at least, parent, as I've yet to figure out whom one of your progenitors was, is just as important as the information itself. She began pacing somewhat. When I was first sealed into you, eventually, I noticed that there was a small, consistent chakra drain coming from me that never stopped, or even wavered, no matter what I, Or you did. At first I thought it was some sort of function of the seal, trying to get you used to my chakra, but by then, I had noticed that my own chakra intermingled with yours on a regular basis. This smaller chakra drain was the function of something else entirely, and in time, I was able to figure out what it was. The QB paused only momentarily, to see that the expression on Naruto's face was one of concentration and deep thought. Frankly, the QB was impressed that he was capable of such feats. Undaunted, she continued. The chakra drain was due to something known as an impression seal. It is an arcane and almost extinct seal that has not been used in a very long time. She tapped her chin in contemplation for a moment. Almost 200 years if I remember correctly. She shrugged. To be perfectly honest, I have no clue why it was used on you, as it seems almost counterintuitive to do so. Her pacing increased in tempo, as Naruto became even more enraptured even though she was sure he didn't understand half of what she was saying. Regardless, she continued. Impression seals are used to bind characteristics of one person to another. For example, if say Sasuke's father were to use the impression seal on him, Sasuke would gain almost exact genetic characteristics of his father. His appearance would change, his bone structure would change, all traces of his mother's side of DNA would be completely obliterated from him. In essence, he would become a pseudo-clone of his father. He would still retain some original genetic characteristics. However, they would have to be of the anomalous sort to actually qualify not to be wiped from his genetic structure. Here, QB paused again, to see a tremendously confused-looking Naruto staring back at her. Barely repressing a sigh, she thought up a better paraphrasing than the long drawn-out explanation she was going to give. Basically, Naruto, if your father, let's say, were to use this seal on you, you would look almost exactly like him, and your body would be almost exactly like him, down to the basis functions of your brain and your organs, as well as your chakra. Your mother's traits would be purged from you. At this, Naruto seemed to have comprehension dawn on him, and nodded his head, a bit too dumbstruck to say anything. She sighed slightly at his obliviousness, but kept pacing and thinking and reciting her conclusions. The problem with impression seals, however, is multifold. She counted off one on her index finger. Firstly, since impression seals have to interact with your own DNA, at least at the basis level, the person who used the impression seal, and the receiver of the seal, would have to be the closest of relatives. Father to son, brother to brother, mother to daughter, sister to sister, etc. If the person who used the impression seal is not sufficiently a match with your own DNA, then your own genetic structure will crumble. And, she paused and gave Naruto a grave look mostly meant to freak Naruto out more than anything. You will die. Naruto's expression paled somewhat at this revelation, and his eyes were as wide as saucers. Again, QB continued on before any questions could be asked, though inwardly she was satisfied at his terror. Another problem with the impression seal is that it takes a constant amount of chakra to maintain. She counted off 2 on her middle finger. This is due to the way the seal actually works. When a cell in the body divides, normally, it is an exact copy of the cell it just divided from. The impression seal changes that. Whenever a cell divides in your body, the seal uses a small amount of chakra to force the genetic structure of that cell to change to fit the impression. Even though the original divided cell was already impressed, the impression seal cannot, no matter how much chakra you give it, influence the process by which new cells are made. She frowned, as if figuring something out in her rambling of consciousness. In essence, the cell will always divide into a genuine and an impressed copy, and the genuine copy will then become impressed, and so on. In this case, the seal is using my chakra to accomplish this. QB shook her head. The problem stems from the fact that a small amount of chakra from me is a fairly large amount of chakra from you. If the impressed person were to run out of the necessary chakra, the seal would still keep trying to impress, and not only would this put you at risk of chakra exhaustion, but it would also fuck up your genetic structure tremendously, as cells would be being divided, and then only partially impressed, due to lack of chakra. QB gave Naruto a wry smile, who still looked dumbfounded, even more than before. You can also imagine placing the impression seal on someone who does not have a large enough chakra reserve to even operate the seal in the first place, such as babies, or civilians with no shinobi background. It would be genetic pandemonium, not to mention that it completely messes up your chakra control. That is why the impression seal was actually able to be used on you. You have a source of almost never-ending chakra inside of you, so the chances of you suffering chakra exhaustion, or of having cells only partially impressed, is next to nil. She finally stopped pacing, instead choosing to sit down on the floor, legs crossed. She looked directly into Naruto's ocean blue eyes, seeing only confusion, but happiness, at least, at having something explained to him. She smiled, but just barely. In older days, the seal was used to bind bloodline limits, or kekai genkai, to those children who failed to inherit their family's bloodline limits, and to those parents who gave birth to new bloodlines. The problem with this is that unless the impression seal is put on someone at birth, that person will invariably, almost invariably die. After a certain age, a person's body is set in its ways, so to speak. Any attempt to change that, and the impression seal will break down the genetic structure more quickly than the new genetic structure can be implemented. The only way that people found this out was that it never worked to use the aforementioned seal on the aforementioned parents of new bloodlines. In every case, save for one that I can remember, and that was a fluke, the parent died. She leaned back and supported herself with her arms, her face mostly impassive. As you can imagine, it's near impossible most times to figure out if someone does or does not have a bloodline limit at birth, unless it's a Doujutsu type such as the Byakugan, or the Sharingan's trademarked pitch black eyes. As such, parents began impressing children at birth, regardless of if they thought the child had the bloodline limit or not. The problem with that is that an impressed person cannot reproduce. She waved her hands dismissively, seeing Naruto's semi-creeped-out expression. I'll spare you the birds and the bees talk, suffice it to say that it simply doesn't work. If you try to unimpress someone, so they can properly reproduce, and it turns out that they don't have the bloodline limit naturally, then, well, you're fucked, aren't you? Kyubi almost chuckled at Naruto's weird expression of being completely lost. She continued anyway. In this, they also found out the hard way that a male cannot be impressed by a female, and vice versa. This meant that if the bloodline limit came from the female branch of a given family, then only females would be able to be impressed. Same with males. You can imagine the shit that caused. After a moment of staring into space, Kyubi looked back down to see what Naruto's overall mental state was like. She sighed. He looked as though he had a mix of confusion, understanding, concentration, and thoughtfulness on his face all at the same time. In all reality, it was quite humorous, and the Kyubi would have let a small giggle spring forth at the look Naruto was giving her, if it weren't so damned exasperating regardless. She figured that she should wrap up the explanation, and just cut to the chase. After all, Naruto wasn't quite smart enough to truly comprehend what she was saying yet. She sighed and stood, leaning on the cage. Basically, Naruto, the seal was more trouble than it was worth. However, in your case, it was perfect, at least in pure usage. Your father was able to place the impression seal on you, to make you look his spitting image, although, I'm not entirely sure why. Nearest I can tell, your father did not have any bloodline limit, nor did he have anything to pass on to you that you could not have gained through regular means. She rather suddenly became serious, and Naruto's attention picked up exponentially, even if he was still completely and totally confused. In this case, the impression seal was placed on you just after birth, and considering that you had a multitude of seals placed upon you, the seal had to have been done literally within seconds of the actual seal holding me in, so that it could mesh with all of the other seals, without causing conflicts. Since the only person near you and me when I was sealed was the Yondaime, this means that only he could have done this seal. Kyubi crouched down and looked directly in the eyes. They entranced him, somehow. All of this means, the same person who sealed me into you, also gave you your impression seal. Since that person had to have been close family, and male, that leaves the possible relations to a brother, or a father. Seeing as how the Yondaime at the time of sealing was roughly 30 years older than you are, it's safe to assume that the Yondaime Hokage of Konoha is. She looked as serious as he'd ever seen anyone look. Your father. She stopped her impromptu speech, and was somewhat miffed to see that the expression on Naruto's face was nigh deadpan. She figured that he was simply shocked at the moment though. Hell, he had just found out who his biological father was after 12 years. Anyone would be shocked speechless by such a revelation. Naruto, true to the Kyubi's estimates, sat there for what seemed like hours, shocked, completely stunned. The magnitude of what Kyubi had said lay heavy on his shoulders, and his mind threatened to shut down. One thought, though, was running through Naruto's mind at high speed. The Yondaime was my father. I am the son of the Yondaime Hokage of Konohagakure. He was absolutely oblivious to Kyubi, who had a slightly concerned look on her face for the blonde container. He didn't even notice himself exiting the Kyubi's chamber, and blacking out, until unconsciousness claimed him. The Kyubi simply sat back and let forth a bellowing chuckle within her cage, before stalking off back into the recesses of it. Well, he took that better than I thought. I'll explain the rest of it to him later. Kyubi simply let forth another chuckle and got to work on her project. When Naruto woke up, he'd be in for quite the surprise. Naruto was floating. It seemed like it anyway. All around him were cogs and various forms of machinery, churning towards an unknown task that Naruto couldn't quite comprehend. One thing drew Naruto's attention. The cogs were beginning to disappear. One by one, the cogs and wheels of the machinery simply crumbled and fell away into nothingness, to be replaced only seconds later by another cog. Except the new cogs looked, they felt they were better than the previous ones. They felt unencumbered somehow, and moved with a more precise rhythm than their predecessors. Slowly, every cog in sight had been replaced by one of the new cogs, and the cacophony of sound that greeted Naruto was deafening, yet comforting. It was a raging tumult of activity, yet it was calm at the same time. It seemed to work better than it had before. Suddenly, Naruto was transported away from the room of machines, and came upon a different place. He was in the middle of a crystal, it seemed, and the light filtering into it seemed to be wrong. The frequency was wrong, discordant. Just as suddenly as he came upon the crystal, he heard a cracking sound and saw part of the crystal's imperfect exterior fall away, as so much unused trash. The crystal was being molded, cut, shaped, perfected, sharpened. The frequency slowly became a gentle hum, and the light focused. The crystal became beautiful, even from the inside, and it seemed to exude a blue-red-violet, almost glow. Slowly, he found that the crystal was placed upon a pedestal in the same room that he had been in before. The cogs churned around him at an even more fevered pace, with an even more calming and dulcet rhythm, and the crystal seemed to glow, giving power to these cogs as they never had before. They became one and the same, crystal with machine, the red and blue glow seeming to harmonize and flow, becoming as a river and a well might parallel, yet different. Throughout it all, there had been a nagging pain, almost as if parts of him were breaking free and another was crumbling. The pain had been necessary somehow, although he couldn't place the reason. He sat and listened to the hum of the crystal, and the sound of meticulous machinery working perfectly within itself. It was comforting. The pain was gone now. He laid back and found himself given to a long and peaceful slumber. QB smiled. Mind and body, her chakra, and his chakra without the seal, they flowed, they congealed. They worked together. And it was wondrous. QB felt the familiar calm of Naruto's deep slumber, and waited for the young blonde prodigy to realize the difference. Today would be a good day. Today would be the first day of the rest of the real Naruto's long and prosperous life. Uzumaki Naruto had come to a decision. He hated, despised, absolutely abhorred alarm clocks. They were a bane on all of human existence. Should he ever by some miracle become Hokage, his first official act would be to hold a grand alarm clock bonfire. It would be the greatest day in the history of the leaf. More than that, had he just used abhor and bane in a sentence? His sleep-addled brain discarded the notion categorically. Naruto brought his fist down upon his hapless alarm clock, ending its relatively short life with an unceremonious crunch. Feeling oddly satisfied, he threw off his covers and sat himself upright in his bed. That's where he noticed it. Either the bed had gotten shorter, or he'd gotten taller. It wasn't a tremendous difference, maybe 4 inches in total, but it was enough, especially in one night his toes unexpectedly met the floor long before he thought they would, not giving him time to anticipate the cold sensation that would permeate his feet soon thereafter. He allowed himself a small shudder, and then opened his eyes for the first time that day. He had definitely gotten taller. This was evidenced by the fact that the cuffs of his pajama bottoms were now hovering somewhere around the middle of his calves. His pajama top was also unexpectedly short and constraining. What a bother. He resigned himself to finding some ingenious way to get a new pair of pajamas during the day. It would truly be troublesome. Yes, that word fit the situation rather well. Naruto sat up and went about his normal daily ritual in his room. He had gathered the things he needed for his shower, and stepped into the bathroom, when he saw his reflection in the mirror. Immediately, he knew something was off about his appearance. There was simply something that wasn't quite right with it, but his still sluggish brain wasn't quite up to the task of figuring it out, at least, not yet. Naruto stepped into the shower and performed the various acts that one performs in the shower, noting that certain other appendages had grown, along with his unexpected growth spurt last night. He filed that tidbit of information away in a part of his brain that was marked "Do not open until puberty." Stepping out of the shower, he quickly dried himself off, and then positioned himself in front of the sink to brush his teeth. He was now more than sufficiently awake to process information about himself, and he stared at his reflection for a good 15 seconds before he gasped and dropped the toothpaste. His eyes. By God, his eyes where once there had been 2 cerulean orbs, as blue as the ocean, and just as deep there were now 2 pitch black, almost pupilless depths, black. They also seemed to be slightly smaller as well, and he noticed other things now, too. His hair. Instead of the incessantly bright golden blonde locks that had once rested as a mop might on a stick, bad analogy, his hair was darker, bordering on dark yellow, but not quite reaching it. It was certainly darker and longer and unruly. His face had elongated, that much was absolutely certain. It was slight, no more than a few centimeters or so, but he didn't really know if he could place the look. It was harder, more edged. Older. His whisker marks, which had been there since as long as he could remember, were now even more refined than they were before. They seemed thicker, and instead of simply being black streaks along his cheeks, they were now clefts along his cheeks, extending back and thickening slightly as they reached his jaw line. The whisker marks, along with 2 slightly longer canine teeth in his mouth, gave him an almost animalistic appearance, like a. Naruto became quite angry. He looked more like a fox. It wasn't that he didn't like the look, far from it. But he was already fucked over from the villagers every day for being the damned incarnation offer. Looking even more like a fox probably wouldn't help things. He forced himself to brush his teeth and perform the other morning rituals that needed doing in the bathroom, and then marched into his room, immediately calling out in his mind, hoping that his tenant could hear him. "You fucking fox! What the hell did you do to me?" Silence for a moment. "Answer me." A yawn, almost. "And what OG morning to you too, sunshine," he actually growled, something he wasn't aware he could do. "I'll ask one more time. What did you do to me?" Naruto heard her scoff in his mind. "Geez, if I would have known you would develop this type of attitude, I would never have done you the favor of removing the impression seal in the first place. Ungrateful cur." From angry to stunned in a half-second. "Wait, what?" There were a few seconds of silence, and what sounded like an exasperated sigh. He got the distinct impression she had just face-palmed. "Why do I even try? Look, I removed your impression seal. It took some doing, but I managed it. The impression seal was the only seal directly connected to my chakra without a buffer to prevent me from simply flooding it with my chakra and breaking it. I have a feeling that it was designed that way on purpose, but I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. A deep breath. Because your seal broke, I was able to successfully reverse its effects. In the time it took you to get a good night's sleep last night, for lack of a better word, I fixed you. Naruto was at a loss. The evil and horrible he thought Kyuubi no Kitsune had done him a favor. A huge favor, it seemed. In the process of one night, he had grown, his appearance had changed, and he felt now that he really took time to notice it, he felt better. He felt better than any day in his life. His thoughts weren't cluttered, his body wasn't nearly as sluggish as it normally was, he could compose sentences with words larger than ramen, and, he felt calm. As calm as he could get, considering the situation anyway. Naruto was silent for a few moments, as he decided the best course of action. He supposed when someone did you a favor you thanked them, but thanking Kyuubi? It didn't make sense. He did it anyway. I guess well, thanks. Still, I can understand the physical changes, but she preened from the fact Naruto had thanked her, but she didn't show it in the slightest. You are undoubtedly wondering why you think more clearly, and you are more calm, eh? It's slight, but it's noticeable, I'm sure. I told you yesterday, the impression seal affects absolutely everything about you. This includes your brain, and therefore your mind. Your thought processes are now natural, for lack of a better word. This means that you can think more clearly, you can be calmer than you used to be, now that you aren't tremendously chemically imbalanced, and you will probably have a much easier time of retaining knowledge. In essence, you're no longer dumb. She snorted. You're still an idiot though. For once, he actually sounded thoughtful. Another effect of the seal's absence, she was sure. So I'm smarter than I was, and I can think more clearly than I could before. He stopped, and then in a slightly more angry voice, continued. Wait, how am I an idiot if everything you just said is true? She sighed again. Simple. You may be smarter, you may be calmer, you may be able to use deductive reasoning and retain knowledge much easier than before, but you still only have the knowledge that you have gained up until now. What you know hasn't changed at all. The only thing that has changed is the fact that you can now, much more easily, remedy that. Well, that and the fact that any information you retained involuntary will now be slightly more accessible. You've probably already caught yourself saying things or thinking things you didn't know you knew, right? Another effect of your brain chemistry being reset. Naruto mulled over that for a moment. He was smarter, his brain was fixed, things he had known before, but didn't know he knew, were now fully cooperating at being accessed. It was like something had come through and run a scrub brush along his mind. It felt clean almost. He let a small smile, a true smile, grace his lips for the first time in what seemed like an eternity. It felt good, damn did it feel good. Soon, before he even realized it, he was chuckling, and then, even laughing. He was happy. He wasn't short anymore, he looked better, at least in his opinion. He was unencumbered. For the first time in his life, he was completely unencumbered. He was Naruto. He wasn't his father's impression, nor was he just a container, he was Naruto. It was then that he remembered something that brought him back down to earth, so to speak. No one had ever given him anything without expecting something in return, not even the Sandaime. Even if his repayments had been imaginary or promises to be good, or some such things. That, and he remembered that Kyuubi had talked about making deals. What do I owe you for this? You said we were making deals, is this one of your acts of good faith, or? Kyuubi chuckled slowly, but without any real malice. See, you're already smarter than you were. What I want is relatively simple. I want out. His expression and demeanor hardened faster than he thought possible. No. No fucking way. I may not like this village, but under no circumstances will I ever really dash. Interrupting seemed to be her forte. See, I told you that you were still an idiot. Do you really think that I would think you would release the seal? She scoffed again, and her voice was decidedly condescending. You weren't that stupid before, and you certainly aren't that stupid now. She stopped for a moment, before continuing in a far more defeated tone. Besides, as much as I hate to admit it, the seal is what keeps both of us alive. If you were to release the seal, I would not be set free. I would die, and so would you. That took him aback. What? That doesn't really make any sense. The seal holds you in. It doesn't kill you, and it doesn't, well, I suppose it doesn't really hurt me. She sighed. Remember when I told you that there were a multitude of seals placed on you? The Shikifuin is simply the primary seal. There are probably a good 60 to 70 other seals on you, most of them simply regulating chakra usage. Another pause. However, there was a backup seal placed underneath all of them, just in case the Shikifuin was ever broken. If the Shikifuin ever dissipates, either by being released, or by brute force, the secondary seal kicks in, and immediately kills you, using the power of your soul to kill me in the process. In essence, I am stuck in here until you die, period. He paused, and digested the new information. I see. So how are you getting out, as it were? Naruto noticed Kyuubi's voice become almost hesitant, but still determined. Did they ever teach you about summoning contracts in the academy? He gave what amounted to a mental shrug. I remember it in passing just a little bit though. You sign a contract with special animals, and in turn you get to summon them to you for battle or whatever, something like that. In turn, she mentally nodded. Essentially, yes. You sign a contract with a certain type of animal, ranging from slugs to toads to bears to, well, there are lots of them. One of them is with me. With the Kitsune, more specifically. Considering that I'm the most powerful of the Kitsune, I hold the contract. What I want you to do is quite simple: sign it. By doing so, you'll be able to summon my consciousness from here into either a Kitsune form, or even into human form that I showed you earlier, even though I'll be able to change my form at any time, given the circumstances, of course. She immediately felt him tense up. With an almost impatient note to her voice, she sighed. Note that I said consciousness, not my body. You will be able to regulate exactly how much power I have at any given time. He relaxed, but only slightly. She figured he needed a full explanation. You remember that collar you saw on my neck when you were your mindscape? This is directly related to that. There is a seal on me that assures that if my consciousness were ever to escape the seal, that it would be directly tied to your own. In essence, it's a collar and a leash, which you hold. I'm only as powerful as you allow me to be, and I only do what you let me. After a short pause, her voice took on an annoyed, embarrassed, and decidedly angry tone. It's humiliating to be subservient to such a human as yourself, but I don't have a choice, now do I? There was a decidedly long and pregnant pause, during which Naruto seemed to be thinking rather hard. Kyuubi waited with bated breath. Well, I suppose it's okay. I trust you, I guess. It was Kyuubi's turn to be taken aback. You trust me? I'm the Kyuubi no Kitsune. I'm the reason why you're hated and lonely. I've killed tens of thousands in the time I've existed, including your father, and probably your mother, and you trust me? Excuse me, but I find that a tad hard to believe. You're not supposed to trust me, not at all. Another mental shrug, but this time, accompanied by a general sense of seriousness. I don't really have a reason not to. You're one of only a handful of people that have ever done something nice for me. I mean, in the course of one night, you've, for all intents and purposes, completely made me into a different person, and a person that I think I can like being. You've earned at least a modicum of my trust for that much. He paused again but continued with a more subdued tone. Besides, all those things you mentioned up to and including the possible killing of my parents, are completely in the past. I can't change them, just as you cannot escape this seal. With a far more exasperated sigh than any he'd ever heaved, he put his head in his hand and rubbed his temples. I still do hold a small amount of resentment, I guess, for the death of my father, but you're being punished for your crimes already, right? And the fact that you're willing to help me simply solidifies the thought in my mind that you're worthy of maybe a second chance, I guess. Kyuubi was once again completely taken aback. The fact that Naruto trusted her was almost unbelievable. The even more shocking fact that he believed her worthy of a second chance was absolutely beyond her realm of rational thought. He knew what she was, he knew what she had done, yet this one act of kindness that she had given him. She let a small smile, a true smile, form on her lips. Perhaps living with this boy wasn't going to be such a harsh existence after all. This was her punishment for her crimes, and she, at this very moment, came to accept that. This time, it was her turn to thank him. Her voice was much more human. Thanks. That really means a lot to me. I suppose since you trust me, and I trust you a little, we can work together on making our lives a little bit more livable, eh? What passed for a ghost of a smile formed on Naruto's lips. Sure. As long as you answer me one question. She raised an eyebrow. Okay? What did you want to know? Naruto flopped on his bed, staring at the ceiling. I've been thinking. My appearance, it can't all be from the impression seal. Genetics is all well and good, but that doesn't explain why I look more like a fox instead of simply like a different type of human. His voice got a bit frostier. You're keeping something from me, and even though I trust you, I want to know what it is. After a small silence, he heard her grumble. Shit, I knew that you getting smarter was going to be a double-edged sword for me. Fine. I told you that the whole reason that I was able to break the impression seal on you was because there was no active buffer between me and the seal, right? I was simply able to flood it with my chakra and break it. However, there was a bit of an unintended and unforeseen side effect. While there wasn't a buffer connected to the impression seal, there was a suppressing seal connected to it. She sighed. The suppressing seals, yes, again, seals, plural, are directly connected to my own chakra capacity. There are 30 of them present within the Shiki Fuin over seal. Each of them holds back exactly 1/30 of my own power from completely intermingling with your own. When the one connected to the impression seal broke, that suppression seal also broke, and gave you your first real taste of my power. Because of this, you were irrevocably changed. You gained certain attributes of mine, and the greater majority of those just happened to be physical manifestations of a fox. He sounded inordinately surprised. So wait, whenever you release these suppression seals, I'll look more like a fox every time. Her voice got harder, as if to dissuade him from getting angry. No. In this case, there is a major difference. My chakra, when intermingled and fused with your own, can only change you so much. Only in cases where I force my chakra into you, or you force it into yourself of your own volition, will your appearance change more towards that of a fox. It's the difference between absorption and transference. This is as far as my own chakra is going to affect you, as long as it's actually your chakra, and not my own. He tapped his chin. He actually tapped his chin, like someone trying to be all intelligent. Kyuubi rolled her eyes. Interesting. I suppose I can live with that. His voice got happier, and he actually smiled. Besides, it makes me more powerful, right? And my whisker marks look badass now, not just cute, as I've been told before. That's always a good thing. Kyubi, in his mind, just shook her head in annoyance, but with a small smile. Naruto continued unabated. Anyway, I believe we were discussing the summoning contract. When do you want me to sign it? Or a better question, how exactly am I supposed to sign it? She mentally shrugged again. Pretty simple. Since I'm the direct holder of the Kitsune contract, you simply come into your mindscape, and you sign it. Easy as that. A pause. Then a short chuckle. But right now, we don't have time for that. We've used enough time talking here. Next time, remind me to use the mindscape for our little conversations. They're going to get long and tedious otherwise. On an impulse, he looked at the clock and went wide-eyed. Shit! It's almost 8. I have to be at the academy in like 15 minutes. Damn it! Naruto broke off contact with the vixen, and hurriedly went to fish his attire out of his pile of clean clothing. With a groan after a moment, he realized that his normal orange attire was not going to fit him. It was already almost too short for him as it was, and with this newest growth spurt it would be like putting on a damned clown outfit. Not that it didn't look that way already, but he threw open his drawers and closet, desperately looking for something, anything that would fit him. After a few minutes of searching, he finally came upon it. It was a gift from Sandai Maji, almost 2 years ago. At the time, Naruto had truly questioned the Hokage's sanity. However, the Hokage had simply told him at the time, "You'll grow into it," and then had laughed for a while before buying Naruto ramen, making him conveniently forget all about it. Naruto was now thanking his grandfather figure profusely in his head. It was a pretty simple outfit, just a maroon tank top combined with black cargo shorts. Naruto quickly put them on, along with his forehead protector and shoes, which thankfully still fit mostly, and stared at himself in the mirror. The shorts and the shoes fit. As did the forehead protector, however the tank top was so damn tight that it became form-fitting. Naruto sighed. It was the only thing he had at the moment, so it'd have to do. He quickly grabbed an energy bar. Contrary to popular thinking, Naruto has things other than ramen in his cupboards, and shoved it successfully down his gullet before he burst out the door. Oh, this morning was starting out just wonderfully. First, her favorite outfit had been in the wash, so she had to wear her second favorite outfit to one of the most important days in her shinobi career, and then, by some fluke, she had managed to meet up with Ino Pig on the way to the academy. Couple that with the fact that her outfit was now getting scuffed up due to the unofficial race that she was having with the pig, and her morning was turning out just perfectly. Haruno Sakura had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl. The day that she would finally become a bona fide genin, and by doing so, win over Sasuke-kun. It was supposed to be a day without the interference of Ino Pig, and a day without having to wear anything less than her best. She had worn her best makeup, and even used her most advanced combing technique to hide at least some of her huge forehead. She sighed internally. She supposed that fairy tales simply weren't meant to be, but of course, she would still win over her Sasuke-kun. She was now neck and neck with Ino, and almost running towards the academy. They came upon an intersection, and for just a split second, in true anime style, time seemed to slow for just a moment as a red and black blur made its way into their field of vision. He was tall for his assumed age, easily taller than Sasuke by at least a few inches. His darkened, shaggy yellow-blonde hair flowed in an almost fur-like way as he ran at a breakneck pace, and his face held a pseudo-mature and animalistic look that they noticed was bringing many forms of blushes out on women adjacent to them on the street, along with a fair share of smirks and outright glares from the male population. The tank top on his upper body was obviously too small for him, but it showed off his lithe, muscular features and his bronze, tanned arms in all their male glory. In a word, that was just what he was, masculine, the very picture of the word. And he was hot, if inner Sakura had anything to say about it. But one thing stood out above all other things as a defining feature about the blonde Adonis that was before them. He had 3 dark, fox-like whisker marks running along each cheek, which served to only heighten his animalistic and masculine appearance. And only one person that Ino and Sakura knew had those whisker marks. Again, in true anime fashion, time seemed to return to normal just as the red and black clothed boy bounded off towards his unknown destination, leaving a stunned and slightly blushing Ino and Sakura behind. Both had already stopped in the middle of the intersection and were staring in the direction that the muscular boy had vanished in, both wondering the same thing, as they resumed their trek. Was that Naruto? The feeling was unreal, absolutely unreal. His body was a finely tuned machine, it moved with precision and purpose, his muscles coiling and uncoiling, releasing more force than he had ever been able to coax out of them before. His chakra was flowing without hindrance, and his mind was going 100 miles a second, but it wasn't simply floating from subject to subject, it was focused, crisp, precise, unreal. The new and improved Uzumaki Naruto bounded from rooftop to rooftop, utterly oblivious to the stares of both hatred and admiration that he was receiving along the way, even from his supposed crush, Haruno Sakura. Nothing could bring him down from this natural high. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he was real, as though his mind and his body were actually obeying him, as though he was truly a shinobi. He was able to move more easily, think more clearly, and he felt alive. It was a wonderful feeling, absolutely wonderful. Naruto had made record time to the academy, beating his previous record easily. From his home to the academy grounds, it took him only 5 minutes at a hard pace to reach his destination. He had never been able to make it from his apartment to the academy in anything less than 10 minutes before, and he found himself with a full 10 minutes to spare before class began. He landed deftly on the edge of the academy grounds, and began a leisurely pace towards the academy itself. By the time he had reached the classroom, he had become slightly unnerved by the stares he was getting, and wondering if perhaps it might have been a good idea to cover up his face somehow before he came here. Naruto cursed slightly under his breath. He would have to see if he couldn't get himself some sort of face mask or something before the day was over. He was internally glad that the stares weren't of hatred or derision, but they were stares nonetheless, and Naruto had an understandable aversion to them. Naruto walked into the classroom with his hands in his pockets and his face down, hoping to somehow hide his face from prying eyes, and as silently as he could, he made his way to his favorite seat in the room, which coincidentally was only 1 seat away from Sasuke, silently cheering whatever deity was looking out for him that day. His little attempt at hiding his face seemed to have worked, and while he was still receiving stares from some in the class due to his form of dress and obvious growth spurt, he was sure that they were just passing glances at best. That was, until a certain hidden genius decided to engage him in conversation. Naruto, this meeting is only for those that passed the Genin exam. You're not supposed to be here. From a passing glance, Shikamaru looked as though his expression was more confused than arrogant or derisive. Instead of actually responding, Naruto simply raised his head up slightly and pointed at the forehead protector, silently praying that it didn't give Shikamaru a good enough view of his face to actually cause him to actually comment on it. The deity that had been watching over him that day, at that moment, apparently chose to forsake him. Nah, Naruto, what the hell happened to your face and your eyes? What the hell? At that one comment, most of the conversation in the room stopped. He cursed under his breath. He put his head back down. Had a growth spurt. Naruto silently cursed again. There was another change. He hadn't noticed it when he was talking to the QB, but his voice had gotten slightly deeper as well. Great. Just fucking great. Naruto decided to simply get rid of the situation as best as he could at this point, salvaging a bad situation. He sighed. Nothing, really. It's just a situation. Naruto hoped against all hope that the pineapple-headed genius would simply drop it. After a few seconds of Shikamaru silently staring at the blonde anomaly in front of him, he simply shrugged, muttered something close to troublesome, and walked away. Naruto released a breath that he didn't even know he was holding in, noticing that the room had seemed to resume their own conversations again, but this time, they seemed to revolve around Naruto somehow. Hey, did you see Naruto's face? He looks so much older, and even cute. Yeah, and his eyes looked like they were black, too. I hate to say it, but he might even be hot. Naruto hot? Well, I suppose he does look better. I'll just go over and say hi real quick. He may be hotter now, but you still don't want to be seen around him. Naruto slightly scoffed at that last comment he had overheard, it serving its purpose to bring him down to earth. It reminded him of exactly who he was. He might have changed into a completely different person overnight, but he was still Uzumaki Naruto, the shunned mistake of Konoha. He sighed. He supposed that at this point, it may be both a blessing and a curse. Naruto buried his face in his arms deeper, now resting on his desk, and tried to make like he was trying to sleep. He was known for sleeping through class, so he hoped that it would buy him some time until Iruka got here, and then all of the attention would be off of him, and he could stop sweating about his current situation so much. Luckily for him, it seemed to work. As if the gods heard Naruto's plea for a distraction, Sakura and Ino burst in the door in their typical loud fashion. Ha! Take that, Ino pig. I got here first, fat chance, forehead-chan. My foot was obviously ahead of yours. I get to sit with Sasuke-kun. Like hell, pig. I'm going to sit with Sasuke-kun. Neither of you will. I am going to sit with Sasuke-kun. Naruto almost groaned. It was like this almost every morning. Sakura and Ino would burst into the classroom, both arguing about who would be the one to sit with the raven-haired target of all women's affection, and then that would get the rest of the fan club riled up, and soon almost all of the girls in the room would be at each other's neck, trying to vie for the precious seat right next to Sasuke's. It was something that most of the guys in the room had gotten horribly used to, and by now, were able to completely tune out. Eventually, Sakura won the little shouting contest, and marched over to where Naruto was sitting. He was sitting with a seat in between himself and Sasuke, but he was sure that it didn't matter. They had gone through this little ritual hundreds of times. Sakura would force Naruto out of his seat for no real reason, and then take the seat that was open in the first place, leaving Naruto have the seat that he used to be in. It was a pointless little dance, and Naruto had gotten used to it. However, he didn't exactly feel as charitable this morning as he did on most mornings, which surprised him to no end. Just yesterday, he had been thinking of asking Sakura out on a date again. Hell, he had even talked to Iam about it in passing. Surely, this whole thing couldn't have changed his entire outlook on life, right? His entire existence revolved around Sakura to a certain extent, and now, he just didn't feel it. That familiar feeling deep in his gut that always formed when he thought about or saw Sakura was just not there. Fucking weird. Deciding to figure out the new intricacies of his mind later, he sighed. He didn't want to deal with this shit so early in the morning. He made a dismissive wave with one of his hands still somewhat under his head. Without intending to, he growled. Sakura, take the seat, and leave me be. I'm not in the mood this morning. Naruto heard Sakura emit a slight gasp at both Naruto's tone and what he had said. In fact, everyone within hearing distance was shocked speechless. It was no real secret that Naruto had a crush of epic proportions on the pink-haired genin, and to hear him talk to her in such a manner was unheard of. Even if it was polite, and mostly non-abrasive, he usually fawned over her like a puppy. Hell, he hadn't even added the chan suffix. Sakura was about to respond with some kind of snarling retort, but she had a flash of the blonde-haired boy running past her on the street. The way his hair had flowed, his body, his face, if she was anything, she was smart. Being in between both Sasuke-kun and the somehow miraculously changed Naruto would give her the ability to not only dote on her Sasuke-kun, but also to find out exactly what was up with Naruto. After all, if he really was as hot as he had looked out there, then maybe she could set him up with Ino or something to get her mind off of her Sasuke-kun. One-track mind. When Naruto heard no response from Sakura, he raised his head ever so slightly to find, to his never-ending surprise, that Sakura had done exactly what he asked of her. Naruto mulled on this for a moment. Perhaps it was better to be feared than loved. His previous attempts to win her over were fruitless, and he had been as sweet as honey. Just one application of moderately applied gruff and force had cowed out her. It wasn't necessarily fear, but girls were fucking weird. He stored that particular piece of contemplative inner monologue away and spared a glance at the pink-haired girl to his left. He saw her glance in his direction, and it looked as though she was just about to open her mouth to ask a question, when the all-too-familiar presence of Iruka burst into the room. Everyone sit down and shut up. This, of course, got exactly the response Iruka wanted. When Iruka used that particular tone, he meant business, and the kids in his classes just somehow knew not to fuck around. Naruto got an almost imperceptible smirk on his face. Iruka may be soft-spoken most of the time, but when he got pissed off, watch out. The Chunin set his small bundle of class materials down on his podium and surveyed his students. Better. Now, if you're here, that means that you've passed the Genin exam. Congratulations. You've just begun your foray into the world of being a shinobi, and things are only going to get harder from here. Naruto tuned Iruka out for a few minutes, just barely hearing him give some sort of speech on responsibilities and hardships that they would now be enduring for the good of Konoha or some such thing. Naruto smirked to himself for a moment. The thought of him doing something for the good of Konoha was almost laughable at this point. He allowed himself to drift off slightly, but he immediately perked up at the mention of team assignments. They went through a few teams, skipping over a few numbers, because those teams already existed, until Naruto heard his name called. Team 7. Uzumaki Naruto, Harino Sakura. At this, everyone in the room expected Naruto to jump for joy, and Sakura to groan in disappointment. However, everyone was shocked, even Iruka, at hearing Naruto curse not so quietly, and at seeing Sakura blush and look at Naruto fleetingly. Before any meaningful gossip about the coming apocalypse could start, the third member of the team was called. And Uchiha Sasuke. A sense of normalcy reigned in the room once again, at seeing Sakura jump for joy, and Naruto curse even louder. Naruto may have thought Sasuke was an okay person, but it didn't change the fact that he was a stuck-up, arrogant bastard. Being forced to be on the same team as him was going to be troublesome. Really, really troublesome. Kami, he was turning into Shikamaru. After a few more minutes of incessant drawling done by Iruka, people began to filter out of the classroom for a lunch break. Naruto took this as the perfect opportunity to disappear for a while. After quite a few people had left, he made a slight jog for a window, and just as he was preparing to jump out the window, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He should have figured. Iruka would want to talk to him, wouldn't he? Of all the times for Iruka to be a mother hen. Naruto, I noticed that you're not exactly yourself today? Is there anything you need to talk about? The Chunin became somewhat meeker, but mostly just dropped the level of his voice. I mean, with what happened last night, and all, Iruka seemed to trail off slightly, trying not to mention too much in a public environment. Naruto sighed slightly. If anything, Iruka was consistent. He supposed that it wouldn't hurt to tell Iruka what had happened in the time betwixt last night, and now, after all, Iruka was almost a brother-father, something like that, to the blonde-haired boy. He sighed and hung his head slightly. Iruka-sensei, there's a reason that I'm not exactly myself today. Or I guess you could say that I'm more of myself than I was even yesterday. Naruto seemed to grumble at his apparent lack of ability to explain his situation. He needed to take this elsewhere. Do you have someplace we could talk for a bit? Naruto resisted the urge to turn around and show Iruka his face. It wouldn't do to have Iruka freak out in the classroom. Does it have to do with? Iruka's voice took on a positively chilly tone. Him? Iruka gave Naruto a concerned glance, and Naruto simply nodded the affirmative. Iruka's eyes widened slightly before calming down. It wouldn't do for him to freak out when his student was depending on him. Yes, sure, Naruto, come with me. We can go to my office. With that, Iruka turned around and led Naruto to his office, which was really no bigger than a large broom closet, but Naruto supposed that it was about as private as he was going to get at the moment. When Naruto got there, Iruka did a quick jutsu that Naruto recognized as a privacy jutsu. He really needed to learn that one. Deciding to get it over with a sigh, Naruto brought up his head to face Iruka, and just as expected, Iruka gasped and began throwing a bevy of questions at him. Naruto? What happened? Your eyes, your whisker marks, your face, what exactly happened? The Chunin's eyes narrowed. What did the Kyuubi do? Do we need to go see the Sandaime? If it was a villager, he'd been in this situation before. Iruka being too overprotective of him, and almost panicking at something. Iruka-sensei. Calm down for a sec, I'll explain everything, he sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Yes, the Kyuubi did something. Yes, I should probably go see the Sandaime at some point. No, the villagers haven't done anything today, Naruto grumbled again and rubbed the bridge of his nose harder. This may take a while, Iruka-sensei, so I suggest you get comfortable. With that, Naruto launched into an abbreviated version of exactly what had happened last night, carefully omitting anything about knowing who his father was, or anything about what exactly he was giving the Kyuubi in exchange for all of this. He also made sure to be as vague as possible, considering his surroundings. The explanation lasted a good 15 minutes, and by the end, Iruka was dumbfounded, or at least, it looked like it. Naruto sat there, in silence, for a few more minutes before Iruka seemed to actually realize exactly what had been said, and lowered his eyes slightly, as if in deep thought. Naruto, let me see if I've got this straight. You talked with the Kyuubi, and he, the Chunin, corrected himself with a flinch of exasperation. She said that you had some kind of weird seal placed on you at birth that messed with your genetic structure, so for some reason, she took it off of you and you woke up like this. Damn. Iruka seemed to imitate Naruto's gesture, rubbing the bridge of his nose with vigor. This is a lot to take in. The blonde-haired genin was somewhat amused that Iruka could summarize the life-changing events in his life so well. Yeah, that's the basic gist of it. It's a bit more complicated than that, but yeah, it kind of floored me too. I mean, I go to bed, I talk with a giant fox, and somehow, in the morning, I'm completely different than what I was before. Shit, the last 2 days of my life have been some of the most eventful in my entire existence. Naruto chuckled slightly and put one arm on the back of his neck, in typical Naruto fashion. Iruka smiled. It seemed as though the old Naruto was still there, at least in his mannerisms. Iruka became serious again. You know, Naruto, you're really going to have to talk to the Sandaime after you meet your sensei. He's definitely going to want to know more about this. Iruka's eyes shined of concern for his blonde charge, but he also had a duty to the village, and this definitely qualified under that heading. Naruto sighed and gave an almost resigned nod of his head. I know, and to be honest, Iruka-sensei, I kind of left a few things out about all of this. I don't really want to say anything about a few things that happened last night, unless I'm in the Hokage tower. Seeing the more questioning than hurt expression on his most precious person's face, he flinched and waved his hand in dismissal. I trust your privacy jutsu, but I don't want to take any chances, otherwise you know everything I do. Iruka smiled. It was good to know that his honorary brother-son, whatever he was, still trusted him so much. Of course, Naruto. I take it that means you want me to come with you when you talk with the Hokage? Iruka had learned through the years to pick up the silent cues that Naruto gave him, and right now, Naruto was definitely showing that he was insecure about the whole situation. Naruto smiled almost imperceptibly at Iruka's ability to read him. Yeah, if you don't mind, that is. Naruto hoped that Iruka didn't have some Chunin meeting or teacher's meeting that he had to go to, otherwise he would have to put his meeting with the Sandaime off for a few hours. Iruka got a slight pensive look on his face, before returning his look to one of concern. Well, I was supposed to have a teacher's meeting right after this, but I think this definitely takes precedence, don't you? Iruka smiled at Naruto, with Naruto smiling right back. Naruto knew that he could count on Iruka in times like this. Before Naruto could thank him though, Iruka seemed to notice the time, and his smile transformed into a slightly harried frown. Damn, it's time to head back to class, Naruto. After you're done meeting with your sensei, come find me, and we can go talk to the Sandaime. Iruka gave a reassuring smile to Naruto, and Naruto nodded at Iruka before they both silently made their way back to the classroom. Unfortunately for Naruto, he completely forgot to keep his head down. The second that he walked into the classroom, most conversation stopped. Naruto smacked himself mentally for forgetting something so important. He noticed that most of the guys in the room had looks on their faces that were about as close to jealousy as you can get. The girls, however, most of them were blushing profusely. Hinata even fainted. Naruto contemplated his reaction for a moment, before deciding to throw caution to the wind. He bared his fangs at the class, causing everyone to recoil slightly in shock. Allowing himself a small smile, he made his way to his seat. Perhaps he was right. Being feared practically trounced being loved, for the most part anyway. He sat down, and crossed his arms over his chest, as if daring anyone to come near him. Not surprisingly, no one did. Naruto had been sitting in the same seat for the better part of an hour. Everyone except for those in Team 7 had already left the room, including Iruka. It seemed as though he'd be able to make that teacher's meeting after all. The last hour had been spent in complete silence. Sasuke was staring out the window, no doubt plotting something nefarious. Sakura was doting on the raven-haired headcase, but Naruto noticed that she sent him a look every now and again, obviously trying to scope him out for whatever reason. It was getting to be a tad bit irritating. He decided to simply get it over with. "Oi Sakura, why in the hell do you keep glancing at me?" He sent a small amount of something in his glare, and was satisfied when Sakura flinched. In all the time that Naruto had known Sakura, she had never thrown furtive glances his way, much less while blushing. He was finding that he didn't much like it, at least not now. It felt wrong, the girl flustered. "Oh. It was nothing really." Inner Sakura was saying something completely different, of course, but no one needed to know that. Naruto sighed. He was really confused and perturbed now. Sakura had never talked to him with so many pauses and stutters. It was like she was turning into a Hinata or something. To be blunt, it was getting on his fucking nerves. He could stand it from Hinata, just because she made it cute, but from Sakura, it was annoying as hell. Nevertheless, he let it drop. Sakura was fawning over Sasuke again, and Naruto simply didn't want to care anymore. Instead, he delved into his link. "Well, Fox, it looks like we have some time to kill. Why don't I come in and sign that contract real quick?" He didn't get a response for a few seconds. He figured that the QB was dozing off. Eventually, he heard a grunt that signified agreement from the red-haired vixen, and found himself drifting into the familiar confines of his mind. When he got there, QB looked decidedly groggy. He smirked. "I never took you to be the napping type, QB." QB was stretching in her human form behind the bars, giving Naruto a sleepy look that looked absolutely adorable on her face. Naruto slapped himself mentally. The QB was not adorable. The well-developed 13-year-old looking kitsune sent him a glare. "I don't have much to do in this accursed place except for nap." Naruto's smirk grew. "Fair enough." He put his hands in his pockets and put on a very nonchalant attitude. "Whatever, where's that contract you want me to sign?" He saw the QB march back into the confines of her cage, and when she came back out, she was holding a large scroll, which she unceremoniously tossed to Naruto outside of the cage. "Here. Unfurl it, find the first open space, and then sign it in your blood. And save the questions as to how do I have blood in my mind, suffice it that you do, and leave it at that." Naruto almost smirked again at QB's last comment, but he did exactly as she asked, and passed the scroll back to the vixen. After Naruto got done sucking on his thumb for a moment, getting the bleeding to stop for long enough that it completely healed, he turned his attention back to QB, who was giving him a strange look. He decided not to think much on it. "Right then, so how's about giving me a rundown of what exactly that means, other than you getting your own bit of freedom?" Naruto was genuinely curious about what exactly he could do with the contract, aside from summoning QB. She just shrugged and yawned. "As far as I know, it's fairly simple. You do some of your arcane hand signs, offer up a small sacrifice of blood and chakra, before then performing the Kuchiyos no Jutsu to summon either myself, or those of my kinfolk. Depending on the amount of chakra that you use for the summon, you'll get anything between a freshly born kit and a fearsome 8-tailed fox to aid you in battle, or to do whatever it is that you need them to do." She gave him a pointed look. "To summon me, all you need to do as far as I know is to simply think of me when you attempt the Kuchiyos. Because I'm already on this astral plane, summoning me only requires that you have enough chakra to communicate with me, no more, no less." Naruto was slightly miffed. He thought it was something a bit more grandiose than simply hand signs, blood and chakra. He was also miffed by the fact that QB had said, "As far as I know." How on earth did the great QB no Kitsune not know how this worked? He decided to call her on it. "Right, that makes sense. Why did you say, as far as I know, though? Don't you know how the jutsu works?" QB looked almost sheepish for a few seconds before replying. "I've never really had a need to learn any of your human jutsu. Hell, I've never even used this summoning contract before. I only know the details of the jutsu used for summon because I had it explained to me once." She waved one of her delicate, white hands. "Remember, I'm a 50-story tall 9-tailed fox. If I need to fight, I don't need to use your pathetic human jutsu. All I need to do is use one of my tails, or my massive chakra stores." She gave him another pointed, if slightly less intense look. "For this whole thing to work, you're going to have to find someone who knows the hand seals of the Kuchiyos, as I never took time to learn anything about your human hand seals." Naruto let this sink in for a minute before getting an almost morose look on his face. "So that means that you won't be able to teach me anything?" Shit, he was genuinely disappointed at that. Not only was he hoping that the QB had some kick-ass jutsu that he would be able to learn, but it meant that the QB would have no real need of him anymore, other than as a jailer. Naruto didn't like the fox, of course who'd like her, but she was still company, and one of the few real friends that he had. He was using a rather loose definition of friend. QB, on the other hand, was snickering behind her hand at the blonde Jinchuriki. It turned into a full-blown laughter, and Naruto was looking at her with a mix of confusion and irritation. Before Naruto could berate her on something though, QB dispelled his fears. She leaned on the bars, pressing her considerable breasts into the gaps, giving him a rather interesting view. "On the contrary, I may not know your human jutsu, but what I do know is so much more valuable." She laughed almost conspiratorially. "I'll save you my life story, but suffice it to say that I've traveled this world hundreds of times over in my lifetime, and I've learned quite a bit. As usual, when she was giving a lecture of some sort, at least, he thought it was usual, she began pacing again. For example, a few hundred years ago, I learned a sword style that I fully intend to teach you. I also learned about human biology, anatomy, and chemistry, and due to the fact that I have almost unlimited chakra, I know more about chakra control, manipulation, and raw usage than almost anyone on the planet. I'll be able to teach you plenty, kid. The only thing I won't be teaching you are your human jutsu. Her expression and voice softened. Remember, we told each other that we would work to make our lives better, and I fully intend on doing just that. Naruto just stared at the Kyuubi for a few moments, before a face-splitting grin made its way onto his face. If anyone had told Uzumaki Naruto even 2 days ago that he would be learning biology, anatomy and chemistry, he would have given them a sour face and told them off with some choice expletives. Now, however, he was ecstatic. The possibilities were nigh endless. With what little he actually knew about them, he could only imagine what he could accomplish. Poisons, explosives, medical techniques, all would be at his fingertips. The prospect of it all was enough to make Naruto giddy. He jumped up to the cage and put his hands on the bars, getting in Kyuubi's face. She took a few steps back, startled. I'm sorry I ever doubted you. Just think. Poisons, explosive mixtures, and the ability to kill so much more easily, a wish come true. Naruto cackled gleefully for a moment, even going so far as to dance around in excitement before realizing exactly what he had said. He had never killed before in his life, however the prospect thereof was quickly becoming somewhat anticipatory, to say the least. Before Naruto could voice his unasked question, the Kyuubi, as always, decided to answer it before he vocalized. Righting herself from her momentary sudden surprise, she gave him a smirk. You're wondering why it is that the prospect of killing entices you so, eh? I told you that a suppression seal was torn asunder when I broke your impression seal, allowing some of my chakra to mingle with your own without any sort of hindrance. This is the basis of at least some of your changes, both mentally and physically. Your growth spurt, as well as a slightly more primal mindset, is just one of the many perks of having ultra-potent chakra such as mine mixed with your own. She sauntered up to the bars again, leaning on them again with her breasts pressed through the gaps. In short, you became more bestial than you were before, and this includes a higher sense of bloodlust. This not only carries into battle, but into— she glanced downwards for a moment, before smiling and looking back up— other facets of your life as well. I don't think you'll really care about that, however, until you reach a few years older than you are now. Naruto allowed himself a slight pause to let that bit of data soak in. He had become a bestial. Indeed, he might come to like this little change in himself. The ability to lose the regular human inhibitions in battle could be quite convenient. He filed the last bit of data that Kyuubi had given him into the do not open until puberty file within his own mind, even though he had a good idea what exactly the Kyuubi meant. More questions bubbled to the surface about the little agreement, however, and he decided to get some answers. This is all well and good, but there are a few things here that don't make sense in the slightest. If you don't know any human jutsu, why is it that you know so much about seals? Furthermore, why is it that you know a sword style, when you have absolutely no need for it? Quite a bit of what you are saying is contradicting yourself. Naruto gave the Kyuubi a thoughtful look, and crossed his arms over his chest. Said Fox chuckled slightly, and gave a dismissive gesture with her arms. I know about seals, because I have studied them in great length. I said that I never had use for your human jutsu, and seals are not really jutsu in the simplest sense of the word. Seals are used extensively, both by humans and by those where I come from. They're the lifeblood of planar travel, and also the medium of some of the most powerful chakra-enhanced blood rituals ever performed. As for the sword style, Kyuubi trailed off for a moment, getting a faraway look in her eyes, before she seemed to take on an almost nostalgic look. A few hundred years ago, I met a rather interesting human. He had ideas and knowledge that were far ahead of his own time, and because of it, he was treated as an outcast. In order to spend more time with him, I agreed to learn his particular sword style. She seemed thoughtful for a second more, as if wondering how to proceed, and then she spoke once again. His style, if you can call it that, is one of the most ingenious and enlightened styles of deadly movement that I have ever seen. It is known simply as Ryudo, or the flow. The thing that differentiates this particular style from all others is the fact that instead of having to memorize hundreds of complex and utterly useless kata, one simply learns how to move. The basis of this style revolves around the user becoming the very essence of water. Kyuubi took in Naruto's pensive look and noticed that he was absorbing this information as though his life depended on it. She smiled. He would indeed be a good student to teach. She went into lecture mode again. The nature of water, in and of itself, is the most versatile nature that any one element has. It can both create and destroy. It can move silently and under the surface, or devastatingly, and with no regard for its surroundings. It can be as deep and unseen as an aquifer, or as obvious and torrential as rapids. It can flow around an object, wearing it down to nothing in a period of hundreds of years, or it can crash upon that object and obliterate it within seconds. It is a contradiction unto itself, and yet it is the very basis for both life and death of any one living being upon this plane of existence. Kyuubi noticed that Naruto was now even more entranced than he was before, and that he had an almost unquenchable eagerness in his eyes that was simply waiting to be unleashed. QB smiled even wider. The kid had no idea what he was in for. The way that this translates into a fighting style is absolutely ingenious. The user of Ryudo becomes that very nature. He flows around his opponents, wearing them down, while at the same time, crashing into them with strong, purposeful strikes that kill without warning and with absolute finality. He flows beneath the surface, waiting for the moment in which to spring upon his opponent, and, as the rapids, demolish them. He can become as a tsunami to his opponents, just as easily as he can be a freshwater well to his friends. In short, Ryudo is the absolute essence of both life and death. You protect those who wish to peaceably drink from your well, by destroying those who wish to hurt them. She crossed her arms across her chest. This is the style, Naruto, that I will be teaching you, and it will take you years to master. However, even a novice in the flow is still a force not to be underestimated on the battlefield. QB watched as Naruto almost shook from anticipation. She allowed herself a wide, mischievous grin, and waited for him to finally break the silence. Naruto was doing mental backflips. He may have been calmer than he was before, but the prospect of being trained in this seemingly rare and absolutely incredible sword style brought back a small amount of the giddy youth that he used to be. He allowed himself a rare smile, a real smile. He would be learning anatomy, biology, chemistry, and a sword style that no one else knew. It was simply too much to put into words. But he tried anyway. QB, that's fucking awesome. If it weren't for the fact that we're stuck in this godforsaken classroom waiting for our sensei, I'd rush outside right now and start practicing. Thank you? Seriously, thank you. Naruto did something that he hadn't done for a long time. He bowed. He bowed in thanks, and in respect for his new sensei, his real sensei. It was shallow, but still more than he was used to doing, ever. Said sensei just waved her hand dismissively, trying to seem haughty, but failing miserably, looking more embarrassed than anything. Oh, stand up, damn it, you're embarrassing me. Seeing him keep his bow, she sighed and flicked his forehead with her finger. He rubbed his forehead, but rose up, giving her a nasty glare. Why'd you flick my forehead? QB huffed indignantly. Because you were being stupid, Naruto pouted. Was not. The fox smirked slightly. Yes, you were. She huffed again in exasperation. Damn brat, anyway, you're not getting all of this for free, you know. I'm adding another stipulation to our little deal at this. QB seemed to cackle gleefully, before Naruto shot her a look that clearly said, you've gone crazy, haven't you? She quickly cleared her throat and regained her composure, readying herself to tell Naruto what her term was. In exchange for teaching you all of this, I want you to. She almost looked abashed for a second, before becoming mostly serious. I want you to change the look inside of this dreary cell. Before he could ask the obvious question, QB cut in. No doubt, you're wondering just how to change my cage. It's rather simple. The inside of this cage is as much an impression as you were just a few days ago. Meaning, the cage looks this way because it was made to look this way. Only you have the ability to change what it looks like. Right now, it looks like a goddamn sewer, and I do not like living in a sewer. Catch my drift? Naruto nodded towards the QB, with a true look of understanding on his face. They at least had that much in common. Naruto absolutely hated where he lived, and the QB didn't much like where she lived either. Naruto, though, could change that. Before QB could even give him instructions on just how to change her abode, he simply did. The cage and sewer structure melted away, revealing a completely white and blank canvas with which to work. QB looked at the blonde Jinchuriki, stunned that he somehow instinctively knew how to change the structure of her cell. His face was a mask of concentration, and before she knew it, she was in a completely different environment, much more inviting than her previous one. It was a medium-sized room, much smaller than her previous cell, lined on either side with kanji that QB immediately recognized as being the same writing on her collar. The walls seemed to be made of a deep mahogany, and the room itself was dimly lit with what seemed to be candelabras. A roaring fireplace on the far side of the room was flanked diagonally on either side by two matching recliners made out of what looked to be fine leather and goose down. In the middle of the room, a queen-sized bed sat, only a foot above the floor, but with a cushion made out of what looked to be even more goose down. An empty bookcase sat directly parallel the fireplace on the other side of the room, and there was a surreptitiously placed door perpendicular to the bed, leading to places unknown. QB was gape-jawed at the transformation. It looked to be an incredible imitation of a Western-style study room, and it was beautiful. It was inviting, warm, cozy, and most of all, it lacked all the impersonal elements that the sewer held. Naruto was standing near the door, a look of almost exhaustion on his visage, before he gave a wide, almost eclipsing grin and scratched the back of his head. QB simply stared at him, stunned, before allowing herself to do something that she wouldn't have done if she had given it any thought. She hugged Naruto. She simply hugged him. After almost 13 years of living in a damp, dank, dark sewer, she now finally had the closest thing she had ever had to a home. Before Naruto knew what he was doing, he had returned the embrace, both enjoying the company. Naruto had been an outcast, an absolute nothing for 12 years, and now that he had at least a modicum of company, he was going to relish it. They stood there for a few minutes, simply enjoying the hug, before Naruto finally broke it off and gave a sheepish smile to the trying real hard to be stoic Kyuubi. Before Kyuubi could vocalize her thanks to the blonde, however, he walked over to the door and revealed something that took her breath away. It was outside. It was a replication, but it felt real. The trees were swaying under a slight, warm breeze. There were flowers of all kinds, and different forms of wildlife roamed freely. The grass was ankle-deep, and it tickled Kyuubi's bare feet to step on it. The artificial sun shone at a perfect angle, casting comforting shadows across the expanse of nature. Birds chirped, sakura petals danced, and the place was alive in so many ways. This time she simply let herself speak her thanks. Naruto, this is absolutely beautiful, so absolutely beautiful, thank you so very much. Kyuubi was the one to bow this time, with a small goofily proportioned smile pulling at the edge of her mouth. Kyuubi was a tailed beast, a monster, a destroyer, something that struck fear into her opponents, and relished in their desperation and death. It was her nature, and it was what she was created for, it's what she was commanded to do, and what she did without hesitation. And yet, in this relatively short time span spent with this boy, she had changed, fundamentally. She allowed herself a small, wistful, and happy smile. When she had been sealed inside him, she had seen in herself the depths of depression. For 12 years she had wallowed in that depressed hell, and in the course of a few days, this boy, whose kindness knew almost no end, had reversed it. He had been kind to a monster, he had shown pity on the pitiless, and he had given someone who, in her own estimation, did not deserve a second chance, that very thing. Right then and there, Kyuubi made a silent promise to herself. This boy would live. This boy would flourish. Uzumaki Naruto would become feared, or loved, whichever he wanted, and she would make sure that she guided him in his endeavors. That much, she would make sure of. Before she could ask how he was able to change her cage without instruction, however, he seemed to get a puzzled look on his face, and gave her a somewhat quizzical glance. So changing the inside of your cage is all well and good, but if I'm going to be giving you freedom anyway, you're going to be staying outside of the seal quite a bit, right? Why change the cell when you're not going to spend much time in it? Kyuubi, after composing herself, simply smirked for a second before giving a true smile to the demon container. For quite a few reasons. 1. This is where I will live, regardless of where I am. You did a fine job on the redecoration job, by the way. Naruto seemed to blush slightly at the praise before Kyuubi continued her lecture. Secondly, where do you think you'll be learning anatomy, chemistry, and biology? To learn those things, you will be entering my seal at night, and while your body rests, your mind will be learning with me. She took a few experimental steps in the grass, almost skipping around, relishing the feeling. Almost absent-mindedly, she continued her explanation. It's a common misconception that the mind needs rest. The physical body needs rest, yes, but the mind is an ethereal existence. It exists almost outside of the bounds of the physical. Because of that, your mind can be in here, with me, learning, and your body can be resting. You'll be as refreshed as you normally are, and you will also be smarter because of it. It's really the most convenient solution. Besides, that empty bookcase that you set up could use some filling up. Kyuubi allowed herself a slightly amused chuckle at Naruto's dual expression of both anticipation and anxiety. It was certainly a new concept, that was for sure. Before they could start on a new line of conversation, however, both noticed that there was interference coming from outside of the seal. The pink-haired one seemed to be shouting at Naruto with vigor. Both Vixen and Container scowled, but Kyuubi gave Naruto a barely perceptible nod, and before Naruto knew it, he was beginning to fade back into the realm of the living. Naruto! 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 Sakura had been calling to the seemingly comatose blonde for almost 5 minutes now, and it was starting to get on Sasuke's nerves. Really. Sasuke had an almost impenetrable emotional wall, but if that pink-haired psychopath screamed even one more time, he might just lose it and go Itachi all over this fucking classroom. Just as Sakura was readying another lungful of air to shout at Naruto again, he seemed to open his eyes and give Sakura a wilting glare, unknowingly saving both of them from Sasuke's fearsome emotional wrath. Sakura flinched back for a moment before regaining what remained of her composure, and sitting down at a seat roughly adjacent to Naruto's own. Sasuke had no real idea what she was going to talk to him about, and he wouldn't really have cared, if it hadn't been for the fact that Naruto had changed, almost at a fundamental level, from the loudmouth he had grown to grudgingly respect before. Sasuke would never admit it to anyone, even under threat of torture, but Naruto had gained his at least passing respect quite a few years ago. Sasuke simply couldn't help it. The boy was almost everything he wasn't, or at least he was. He used to be brash, loud, and seemingly insouciant to the point of being absolutely annoying. None of this made sense to Sasuke, mostly because of the fact that he knew that Naruto was an orphan, and for whatever reason, he was hated with vehemence by the greater majority of the village. To maintain such a happy-go-lucky attitude under such scrutiny and adverse conditions was more than enough to earn Sasuke's respect, even if it was only because Sasuke could empathize quite well with the pain of loneliness that Naruto had endured. Sasuke allowed himself a moment of rare perception. Seemingly overnight, the dope had gotten taller, changed his wardrobe, matured his appearance, and gotten to be less of a cheerful dope than he was before. It was a change that Sasuke wasn't sure he liked or disliked about the blonde. It just seemed to be something that was different. His recommendation to his own psyche about the benefits or downsides to Naruto's new persona wouldn't come until later, he supposed. Sasuke prepared himself to completely ignore both Sakura and Naruto. However, he had a flash of rare inspiration. Sakura obviously was as curious about Naruto's transformation as he was, and undoubtedly, she would ask questions that he himself would never bring himself to ask. Instead of tuning the pair out, he focused an infinitesimal amount of chakra to his ears, and listened. Naruto, since we're going to be teammates, and all, I was just wondering if you could tell me why it is that you look so different, and act different, than you usually do. I mean, it's not a bad change, it's certainly a good thing, but to just change overnight like that. Sakura's tone was almost condescending, but it was able to broach the subject well, at least by Sasuke's estimation. His theories on Sakura's conversational abilities, however, were abruptly shattered. Sakura, yes, we are going to be teammates. We will perform missions together, and we will eventually get to know each other much better than we do now, assuming that you don't spend all of your time fawning over Sasuke. However, I do not wish to divulge my secrets at the moment, to anyone, especially not someone like you. Do we have an understanding, Haruno? Naruto's tone left little doubt that he was holding the greater majority of his emotion back, as his speech came out cold and almost emotionlessly, unless one listened carefully for the spiteful undertones thereof. Sasuke's brow furrowed slightly at the thought that Naruto had secrets, and he resolved himself to learn them. Even more impressive, however, was that Naruto, who, to Sasuke's knowledge, had a tremendous crush on Sakura, would even speak to her in such a way. It was much the same tone that Sasuke used to turn down his own ravenous hordes of fangirls, and Sasuke's respect for the blonde rose just a notch higher. It seemed as though Naruto had either gotten over his crush on Sakura, or he had forced her out of his mind. Either way, it was bound to make a better ninja out of him. That could only work to his favor. Sasuke continued to listen in, as the pregnant pause after Naruto's little tirade had begun to dwindle. But I just wanted to. Sakura's reply was tersely cut off by Naruto's intervening candor. I understand what you wanted to do, Sakura. Naruto's voice rose ever so slightly, and the fact that his voice had deepened was now apparent for all to hear. The tone of his voice, along with his changed appearance, made even Sasuke flinch ever so slightly. It made Sakura, on the other hand, jump back in her seat, eyes quivering from some bank of stored teardrops that she no doubt had somewhere. Perhaps a new form of Suiton Jutsu, or a bloodline limit to create fresh sources of salt water. Just thinking about it, the possibilities were enormous. Sasuke's reverie over the possibilities of Sakura's Teary Jutsu was broken as Naruto continued his tirade, but in a slightly more subdued tone than before. If anything, it gave his words even more ice than they previously had. Sakura, as you can plainly tell, I am not in the most jovial of moods. Quite frankly, this entire situation pisses me off to no end. I have things to do, people to go see, and training to commence, and we are stuck in this dingy room waiting for our retarded, excuse me, tardy, sensei to arrive. I have better things to do than sit here and have a conversation with someone who will only serve to irk me even more than I currently am. So, the understanding is this. You will leave me alone for the time being. You will not bother me. You will, in time, come to know exactly what it is that caused my oh-so-miraculous transformation into a human being that you can actually converse with. Until the time that I so deem you worthy of such information, you will summarily shut up. Do I make myself completely and unequivocally clear, Haruno? Sasuke was stunned, possibly even more so than Sakura. Never in the entire time that he had known the Dobe had he ever heard him speak like that, and certainly not to Sakura. It was cold, calculating, precise, and effective. Naruto's particular rant was now accompanied by a particularly stabbing stare and a visage that screamed irritation. Sasuke subconsciously memorized Naruto's little monologue, modifying it for his own needs, should he ever need it to beat off a particularly virulent strain of fangirl. Sasuke again began to contemplate the ramifications of customized Suiton Jutsu, as Sakura began to freely tear up. He began wondering if perhaps this was a blood limit that all women shared, and he found himself again wondering if perhaps women had an instinctive ability to create their own freeform amounts of salt water when necessary for certain Suiton Jutsu. The amount of crying that females, on average, did was more than enough to justify in Sasuke's own warped mind the creation of these saltwater Suiton Jutsu. Sasuke was brought back from his musings on females and Suiton Jutsu, forcefully, when a man entered the room. He was tall, easily 6 feet 4 inches. His first distinguishing feature was that he hid most of his distinguishing features. He had on a blue face mask that covered up to the bridge of his nose, and his forehead protector covered one eye. His silvery gray hair shot up, as if defying gravity, and his one visible eye seemed to exude laziness. Other than that, however, he was fairly plain. A very standard jounin outfit adorned his lean but muscular figure, and if one were to see him on the street, they would certainly just pass him by as yet another faceless shinobi. The man took a look around the room, as if sizing up exactly what he had walked in on. Sakura's teary eyes were turned towards him, as was Naruto's and Sasuke's own jet black ones. The jounin seemed to look at Sasuke with an appraising and almost supportive look, and then his eyes narrowed somewhat when his gaze reached Sakura. However, the jounin dropped the orange book and stared wide-eyed and gape-jawed at Naruto when his gaze finally found him. A pregnant pause followed, and you could cut the awkwardness and tension in the air with a kunai. The jounin seemed to look away from Naruto for a moment, before regaining his composure. His one visible eye curved upward slightly, giving the only real indication that he was smiling, and he uttered his first words to Team 7. "Ma, what an interesting mix of people this team has. My first impression of you is that you're pathetic. Meet me on the roof in 1 minute. Ja-ni." With that, the white-haired jounin poofed to the roof, leaving Team 7 to near face fault as they heard his initial impression of them. Sasuke brushed it off and made his way towards the door, his thoughts once again on the ever-present need to kill his brother, temporarily abandoning his quest to learn more about the blonde puzzle on his team. Naruto felt great. As he was walking up the stairs, keenly aware of Sakura's attempt to penetrate his skull with her eyes, he realized that he had gotten quite the load off his chest. He almost sighed with contentment. The look on Sakura's face had been priceless. Betrayal, hurt, offense, all of them had passed on her visage in the blink of an eye, literally. He had certainly gotten the art of being cold and calculating down rather quickly. Naruto followed Sasuke to the roof, where their extremely tardy sensei was waiting for them. Consciously or not, Naruto managed to sit with Sasuke between him and Sakura, facing their sensei, who he noticed was giving him strange and almost scared looks every now and again. It irritated him. "So, you're Team 7. I'm your jounin instructor. Let's get acquainted with each other, any? You, Pinky, go first." The gray-haired man simply pointed to the now undistraught girl sitting to Sasuke's right, and she gave him a quizzical expression. "Ne-sensei, what do you mean? What should we say?" Sakura's own temerity was reflected in an almost amused gaze from their sensei, who turned his head upwards to glance at the clouds. "You know, your likes, your dislikes, your hobbies and your dreams? That kind of thing." Sakura seemed to process this information for a second before returning their sensei's deadpan expression. "Why don't you go first? After all, we have no clue who you are." Sakura seemed almost pleased with herself for thinking up such a devilishly clever scheme, and their sensei only chuckled slightly before glancing at the clouds once more. "Alright, my name is Hatake Kakashi. I like many things, I dislike some things, I have many hobbies." He seemed almost to be not there while he was speaking, and if Naruto didn't know any better, he would have thought him under some sort of narcotic. "As for my dream, you're too young to understand it." Kakashi's gaze stayed skyward, while Sakura whispered to the group, "So all we got to know was his name." Naruto nodded slightly before Kakashi returned his gaze to Sakura. "So, Pinky, you're up again." Sakura puffed slightly at being called Pinky, but it was quickly dispelled as she shot a sidelong glance to Sasuke, blushing the whole time. "My name is Haruno Sakura, I like." She shot another sidelong glance to Sasuke, before gaining what little composure she had left. "My dislikes Ino pig, and mean people." With that, she threw a glare at Naruto, who only shrugged. "My hobbies," she giggled again. "My dreams." She completely flipped out at this, going into a giggle fit of epic proportions, after shooting another long glance at Sasuke. Kakashi resisted the urge to groan. "A lovesick stalker of a genin. Wonderful." Quickly deciding to move on, he pointed to Sasuke. "You, the brooding one, go." Sasuke seemed to think for a moment, before answering in his typical brooding and unemotional voice. "Uchiha Sasuke. I have very few likes, and I dislike quite a lot. I have no hobbies, but I have an ambition. To revive my clan and to kill a certain man." Sasuke finished on a cold note, giving Sakura dispense to giggle like a horny schoolgirl again, while preaching his virtues. Kakashi simply stared at the boy. "So an Avenger. Just as I thought." He put his thoughts aside for the moment, and finally pointed to the person he was truly curious about. "You, Blondie, go." Naruto didn't answer for a second. To be honest, he was contemplating what to say. Given the same question only days before, his answer probably would have been something about ramen and becoming Hokage, but now Naruto decided to wing it. Whatever came out, came out. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto. My likes are the few people in this village who treat me with respect, training, and a certain vixen." At this, Kakashi's eyes widened ever so slightly, and Kyubi blushed when Naruto gave what amounted to a mental Cheshire grin. "My dislikes most of the people in Konohagaku no Sado, and possibly the Yondaime Hokage. I haven't made up my mind yet." Kakashi's eye widened even more at this, and Sasuke and Sakura both gave him an almost frightened stare. His tone was almost as cold and uncaring as Sasuke's, and to hear that he didn't like the Yondaime. "My hobbies, it used to be pulling pranks, now I don't really have any. My dream." Naruto closed his eyes for a second, truly contemplating what his dream was. Up until a few days ago, his only dream was to become Hokage and gain the respect of the village that he thought he so dearly loved. Now, however, things were different. He knew things that he didn't know then, and he wasn't so happily oblivious to his own surroundings. He still wanted recognition from the village, but differently. He wanted them to recognize his power, and especially, that he was no one to be trifled with. He had been kicked around long enough. Simply grinning and bearing it didn't work anymore. He gave a small chuckle before continuing with the last part of his soliloquy. "My dream is to make this village see just exactly who I am, one way or another." A small smile came onto his face, and he noticed that Kakashi was drilling him with a glare filled with barely suppressed something. It had been the same something that he had sent to Sakura earlier, and he still had no idea what it was. It's called killing intent, or ki. It's basically the ability to extend your own soul and spirit's dominance onto others via the use of expanded and activated chakra. It's tremendously useful, and it will be something I will be training you to utilize. Naruto silently thanked the Kyuubi, and glared right back at the Jounin. Unconsciously, he unleashed his own killing intent, laced with the raw killing intent of the Kyuubi behind it. Kakashi found himself hard-pressed to breathe. He had been holding his own ki back remarkably well, deciding not to kill the brat until after the other two had left. Hearing that the brat hated the yandere, his sensei, even knowing the kid's burden, was enough to push him well overboard. But he had failed to anticipate that the kid would have his own killing intent, laced with none other than the fear-inducing ki of the Kyuubi behind it. Sasuke and Sakura both felt it as well, as their own startled and fearful expressions showed. Naruto simply sat there, calm and uncaring to the world. As suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The pressure that had been exerted on the air abated, and the three found that they could breathe once more. After a few moments of tense silence, Kakashi figured that he should wrap things up and confront Naruto. Well then, you three, we're going to be doing some survival training tomorrow at Training Ground 7. You may not have known this, but the true genin exam lies with the instructor, not with the academy. I will choose, tomorrow, whether you three pass or fail. Note that there is a 66.6% failure rate in this test, so there is a good chance that 1, 2, or even all 3 of you will be sent back to the academy. Oh, and don't eat breakfast, you'll only throw up. Kakashi gave a half-hearted grin to the now stunned 3, before motioning to both Sasuke and Sakura to leave. Thankfully, they got the hint. Sasuke hesitated slightly on the edge of the building before giving a slight nod to Naruto, and heading off into the distance. For a few moments, Naruto and Kakashi simply stared at each other, either one willing to make the first move. However, suddenly, Naruto made a move to stand up. Kakashi released his hand from his kunai pouch, and resumed his deathly glare upon the Jinchuriki with renewed vigor. Naruto simply smirked. Before you give me some lecture on the virtues of the yandere, save it. I don't have time for such pointless drabble. I need to go get one of my friends in this village, and then head to the sandame's office. Kakashi was nearly fuming at this. If Kakashi was anything though, he was pragmatic. He didn't allow the majority of his emotion to show, and simply sighed at the blonde in front of him. Very well. We'll go see the sandame. Kakashi watched as Naruto's face changed to one of surprise, at the mention of we. It quickly schooled itself into an expression of irritation, however. I'm afraid that we will not be seeing the sandame, Kakashi. Myself and Iruka are going to speak to him about certain matters that I would rather you not be privy to. Naruto steeled his gaze at Kakashi, but of course, Kakashi was a jounin for a reason. He simply stared right back and crossed his arms in defiance. Naruto, we will be seeing the sandame, even if I have to drag you to the tower myself. That killing intent of yours was clearly the Kyuubi's. If anything, the seal could be weakening, and seeing as how I'm one of the few people left in this world who knows, at least somewhat, how that seal works, I will be present. Naruto's face was impassive for a moment, before it turned into a smirk, much to Kakashi's surprise. Trust me, Kakashi-sensei, I know more about how this seal really works than you ever will. If you really knew how this seal worked, you wouldn't be berating me. Or perhaps, you're not familiar with my impression seal, Kakashi's visible eye widened to the point of shooting above his forehead protector at that comment. His entire body seemed to freeze slightly, and he seemed to almost be contemplating his very existence at that moment. In truth, Kakashi was stunned. He did know about impression seals. It was required history reading for jounin. However, the allegation that Naruto had just made that he had an impression seal, it couldn't be. Kakashi knew about the seal on Naruto's navel. It sported an array of seals, ranging from simple suppression seals, to seals that regulated chakra conversion, and even seals that controlled chakra flow. All of these seals were controlled by the Shiki Fujin overseal. The prospect that Naruto had an impression seal mixed in with all of those, then it hit him. Naruto looked considerably different than he did when he had been presented with information on him by the sandame. That's not to say he didn't know what he looked like. He had been one of the ANBU to save Naruto's life when he had been beaten before, and he had also been one of the ANBU assigned to watch the kid when he was younger. He remembered a child with blonde hair, blue eyes, and small whisker marks on his cheeks. The Naruto that was standing in front of him, however, was completely different. He had jet black eyes, darker yellow blonde hair, and much more defined whisker marks. On top of that, he was taller, leaner, more muscular, and more mature looking than he had been on the picture he had from the Hokage. With all of this knowledge, he came to one conclusion. Naruto had indeed been subjected to an impression seal. And that seal was broken. Naruto eyed the seal. Kakashi's thoughts were running rampant, and they threatened to simply spill out. The ramifications of Naruto having had an impression seal all this time, only a blood relative could put on an impression seal. Kakashi's mind chose that moment to blank. Naruto sighed. The jounin seemed to have figured something out. He had certainly said too much. The Kyuubi was groaning in the back of his head, and he felt like slapping himself on the forehead. Now he would have to take Kakashi with him to the sandame, if for no other reason than to assuage his sensei's fears about his own seal. Besides, if this Kakashi guy was going to be his sensei, he might as well start off with a gesture of good faith. Kakashi, fine. We'll go get Iruka, and we'll head to the Hokage. Will that do? Kakashi simply stood there for a moment before dumbly nodding his head. They both set off to find a certain dolphin, and then made their way to the Hokage tower in relative silence. The Sandaime was having a good day. Then again, any day when the out pile of his paperwork was full, and the in pile was empty, was a great day. Paperwork was the bane of a Kage's existence, and quite possibly the only foe that a competent Kage was hard-pressed to fully vanquish. Sandaime let himself indulge in a small chuckle. The things he did for Konoha. He was just about to pull out his favorite orange book from a hidden compartment in his desk, when a soft yet urgent knocking sounded on his solid oak doors. He sighed. Of course, there would be someone here to see him as soon as the paperwork was finished. It was simply a universal constant, he supposed. He called for whoever was behind the door to enter, and was somewhat pleasantly surprised to see a blondish mop of hair peek from behind the door, along with two other nins that he recognized as Yumino Iruka and Hatake Kakashi. He was just about to greet Naruto and the others when he noticed that Naruto looked different. Darker hair, new yet somewhat familiar clothes, black eyes, pronounced whisker marks. Sarutobi immediately snapped himself to attention, and with a gesture of his right hand, a squad of ANBU was immediately surrounding the blonde demon container. Sandaime-majin, what's all this? Naruto, or perhaps a facsimile thereof, had an almost irritated look on his face, but it quickly changed to a serious expression when he saw the absolute firm and schooled features of the Sandaime. Who are you, and why do you look like Naruto? Answer incorrectly, and it will be your head. Naruto was slightly taken aback by the supposedly kind old man's words until he remembered exactly why he was here, and that he looked considerably different than he used to. A small bead of sweat made its way down his features, until he regained his bearings and got down to business. Sarutobi-ajin, I am Naruto. My appearance is the product of Naruto fought to find the right words for the situation, before he was saved in the nick of time by his brother figure, Iruka. Sandaime-sama, I assure you, the person standing in front of you is indeed Uzumaki Naruto. I can attest to that myself, as can Kakashi-san here. Iruka gave an almost imperceptible elbow nudge to the silver-haired Jounin before said Jounin nodded to the Hokage, still in his stupefied state. The Hokage seemed to mull the situation for a moment, before gesturing for his ANBU to leave. The ANBU captain gave him a gaze that clearly showed concern, but a hardened glare from the aged leader made clear that his orders stood, and as quickly as they had arrived, the ANBU team dispersed. Naruto let out a breath that he didn't even realize he had been holding in, and walked casually up to the Sandaime's desk, before depositing himself in one of the few chairs that sat across from the Sandaime himself. Internally, his thoughts were going a mile a minute. What to say, how to say it, and what questions to ask, were the primary concerns for him to mull upon. Iruka and Kakashi both strode to the Hokage and gave a bow of respect, before positioning themselves on either side of Naruto, sitting down in identical chairs. For a few moments, no one said anything, and the Sandaime simply fixed his gaze on Naruto, still trying to discern if the boy sitting in front of him was really the boy that he knew and cared for. It was eventually Naruto himself that broke the tense silence. Aji-san, I know I look different, but I guarantee you, I am Naruto. In fact, the reason I came here is due to the reason why I look different. These two are here because they both know of the situation, if only somewhat, and probably deserve to know about the whole thing as much as you do. Naruto's stomach was doing flip-flops in his stomach under the scrutinizing glare of the third Hokage, before the Hokage's gaze turned to one that Naruto had seen many times before. It was a gaze of understanding and joviality, and it was the way that he looked at Naruto when he usually came to visit. I believe you, Naruto. After all, you are the only person who still calls me an old man. Iruka and Kakashi both sweat dropped slightly at that. Iruka supposed that it was true Naruto was the only person who still called the Hokage by his old man moniker as opposed to Sandaime-sama or something equally as respectful. Iruka made a mental note to pound some respect into Naruto's head after all of this. Naruto simply scratched the back of his head while giving the Sandaime a sheepish grin. Naruto had called the Hokage an old man for as long as he could remember, and it had taken on the status of being a term of endearment between the two. He allowed himself a small reminiscing smile before turning his gaze back to one of business, and got ready to relay the story that he had told Iruka, but without abbreviations. The Hokage saw his expression, and performed a privacy jutsu on his office. Naruto once again wished that he could learn it. Aji-san, the reason I'm here. Naruto searched for the words to begin his explanation, but none came to him. In a flash of unusual inspiration, he decided to simply come out with it. He sighed before looking the Sandaime straight in the eyes. He chose the words that would undoubtedly mean more to the Sandaime than trying to explain the whole thing. Aji-san, Kyubi broke the impression seal. Sarutobi's expression changed instantly from one of kindness to one of both confusion and extreme surprise. The pipe dropped from his mouth, and his eyes widened further than Naruto had ever seen them. But that seal, how what? The Sandaime was absolutely beside himself in surprise. Not only did Naruto know of the impression seal, but somehow, the Kyubi had broken it. The entire situation was confusing as well as borderline frightening, but he forced himself to calm down, and with calm, yet slightly shaking voice, he asked Naruto to start from the beginning. Naruto more than happily obliged. He relayed the entire story, almost verbatim to the sandaime, with Iruka and Kakashi's expressions both becoming ones of surprise and, in Kakashi's case, anger, at hearing some of the things that were revealed during the story itself. He told them of the fact that Kyuubi would be teaching him, that he had signed the Kitsune contract, and that his end of the bargain for being taught by the Kyuubi was to summon her from time to have some fresh air. They looked sufficiently angry as well as terrified at that revelation. When Kakashi looked as though he was about to interject, the sandaime threw him a look that clearly said, "We'll talk later." When it was time to get to the end, he paused for a moment, as though choosing his words, and then continued unabated. After the Kyuubi got done explaining to me exactly what the impression seal was for, and how it was used, she put the whole situation together for me. Naruto paused again for a moment, before sighing and resigning himself to the chaos that his next words would cause. The impression seal can only be put on by an extremely close blood relative, and it had to have been put on at the same time that the Shiki Fujin was placed on me, so as not to cause conflict with the other seals. That means that the Yondaime had to have put the impression seal on me, and that means that he was a direct relative of mine. He was entirely too old to be my brother, so that means that the Yondaime was my father, right, Aji-san? Naruto stared impassively as the Hokage's own expression turned to one of almost anguish, and Iruka's turned to one of both surprise, admiration, and a small amount of pity. Kakashi's reaction, however, Naruto could never have anticipated. The desk in front of Kakashi shuddered with the impact of Kakashi's fist, and with a glare that would have killed lesser men, he stood up and met the sandaime's own gaze with his own. "You lied to me. My sensei's child did not die. All this time, all of this goddamn time, and now you never told me, damn you. I was supposed to be his godfather. I would have looked over him, protected him, provided for him, and yet I was never told." Kakashi was shaking with barely repressed rage by now, and Naruto's expression was one of astonishment. Hatake Kakashi was one of his father's students. What's more, he was supposed to have been his godfather. Not only that, but this man, who Naruto could never remember meeting before in his life, was practically oozing killer intent on Naruto's behalf for not being allowed to care for him as a child. Unbidden, a smile came to Naruto's face, and his respect for the man sitting to his right jumped up considerably. Iruka, by this time, was restraining Kakashi from jumping over the desk to accost the Hokage, and surprisingly, the sandaime looked almost ashamed. Naruto wondered if perhaps his unofficial grandfather figure was truly remorseful for his actions. The silence in the room was broken by Sandaime's own shaking voice. "It was never my decision, Kakashi. When the sealing took place, Yondaime-kun made sure to let me know that no one, aside from Jiraiya, myself, and his mother, would know who he really was." Of course, his mother. The sandaime trailed off with a pained expression on his face, to the confusion of everyone in the room, before he resumed his speech. You have to understand his reasoning. He knew that his son was going to have a hard life, and while he knew that if the populace were to know that Naruto was his son, it would make it easier on him, it would also create even larger problems. He believed that Naruto would still have his mother, at least to a certain extent, but Kakashi seemed to deflate slightly at the old man's words, but his gaze was still one of intense and burning defiance. Even Kakashi looked confused, however, at the constant references to Naruto's mother. Sarutobi let forth a heaving sigh, before repositioning his pipe in his mouth and continuing his explanation. "You know as well as I do that Minato had many enemies, both inside and outside of Konoha. While the populace may have accepted Naruto more freely if they had known his heritage, it was never a guarantee. They could have thought it a lie, just as easily as they could have embraced it. It was a 50-50 chance of either complicating the situation or making it better. However, it would have been an almost guarantee that if people freely knew that his son was alive, Naruto's life would have been in immediate and unrelenting danger. Do you really think that the stone or the cloud would have left him alone, after the infamous yellow flash decimated so many of their shinobi? There's even no real guarantee that he would have been safe from his enemies on the council, or in certain factions among Konoha's elite, as he had made quick enemies with quite a few on the council, as well as in certain ANBU divisions. In the end, Kakashi, Naruto would have been in even more danger if people had even thought that Naruto was Minato's son, than if people had no idea." Kakashi's glare had completely died down by now, and he was slumped in his chair, with his one visible eye towards the floor. If Naruto didn't know better, he would have thought he was trying to keep from crying. Before the sandaime could continue again, Naruto's one burning question made its way to the front of his mind, and he knew that he needed to know. "Sandaime and all of this gives me so many more questions, but there is one question that I really want answered." Naruto paused for a moment before fixing his gaze back on the old man. "I now know who my father was, and I even know his first name, but who was my mother?" The sandaime seemed to stiffen at this, and Iruka's expression was simply one of confusion, much the same as Naruto's. Kakashi simply had an intensely pensive look on his face. Sandaime rubbed the bridge of his nose, before taking a long drag of his pipe. "Naruto, your father and your mother's relationship was kept almost as much of a secret as your own heritage was. This is due to the fact that your mother's clan, if they had known of the relationship, would have strictly forbidden it, and because of this, they decided to keep their romance a secret from almost everyone, including Kakashi. Kakashi was simply told that Minato would be having a son, but the yandere refused to tell him who exactly the mother was. Sarutobi sighed once more, and looked Naruto directly in the eyes. Your mother is actually the reason why the impression seal was placed upon you in the first place. A great resemblance to the yandere could be overlooked in many people's eyes, however if you had looked as you do now, there would have been no doubt as to your lineage among many, due to the fact that many in the village knew your mother, or rather her clan, and their traits are more distinguished than even your father's. Mind you, even though that particular clan's features can be overlooked just as easily, at the time, there was a bit of a rumor that the yandere was involved with. Let's just say that with the rumor, had you looked as you do now, there would have been no doubt. Kakashi stiffened completely at this admission from the Kage, and his one visible eye started shaking. You don't mean the rumor was true? His black eyes, oh my god, Kakashi was now shaking even more than he was before, and even Iruka looked as though he had caught on. Naruto, on the other hand, was oblivious. Yes, it makes sense now. Your father didn't give you your impression seal to pass on his own genetics to you, but rather to disguise you. Naruto was still puzzled, and the Kyuubi seemed to pick up on it. Isn't it obvious, Kit? Your true eye color, what one group of people in Konoha has ever had jet black eyes. Naruto mulled on this a moment, before realization hit him in a flash. Before he could speak, however, the sandame beat him to it. Naruto, your mother's name was Uchiha Masao. Naruto promptly fainted. Naruto's eyes opened ever so slightly at the sound of his name being called, and he began to wonder just what was going on, and where he was. Naruto, come on Naruto, damn it, what did I always used to do when Hinata fainted? Memories of the prior conversation came back to him in a flash. His father, the reason behind the seal, his mother. Naruto! Wake up, you baka! His mother! Naruto snapped awake immediately, noticing that he was being propped up by a tremendously relieved-looking Iruka, with a slightly worried-looking Hokage and Jounin sensei looking down at him, their expressions quickly becoming relieved as well. Naruto himself gave a placating gesture with his right hand, before being helped back into his chair by Iruka. Naruto wasn't entirely sure what to do. There were so many questions floating around in his head, and so many other things that he needed clarified, that it would take the better part of the rest of the day to fully sort them out. He sighed. There was a story behind all of this, he was sure, and most of his questions would probably be answered if he simply asked the old man to relay it. Besides, if there was one thing that Sarutobi was good at, it was weaving a good tale, even if it was non-fiction. Aji-san, tell me everything. I want to know about myself, I want to know about my parents, and I want to know what's left. I've had a lot of secrets withheld from me lately, and I'd like it for that to stop. Just tell me everything. Everything. Truthfully, Naruto was just a bit peeved. Within the space of about 2 days, he had gone from knowing absolutely nothing about himself to having his entire life changed, and he would much rather have it all come out now instead of having to learn it piecemeal from different sources. Sarutobi seemed pensive for a moment. His pipe was alternatively smoldering and burning brightly at short intervals, and from past experience, Naruto knew that as a sign that the old Hokage was thinking rather hard. Finally, it looked as though he came to a decision. I've already told you quite a bit, I suppose I should simply get it all out there. Although, are you sure you want Iruka and Kakashi to hear this? All eyes in the room turned to Naruto, and he seemed to furrow his brow for a moment, before his normal determined look reappeared on his young visage. Hi. Iruka is someone I trust implicitly, and Kakashi, well, I suppose if anyone outside of me and Iruka deserve to hear this, it's him. So yes, I want them included in this. Iruka's expression warmed considerably, and Kakashi's own cyclopean look seemed to alternate between thankfulness and warmth, before schooling itself into impassivity. Both sat down, and after a few moments of contemplation, the Hokage commenced telling the story. It all began about 1.5 years before the Kyuubi attacked. Your father, having been wounded while trying to perfect one of his jutsu, had been taken to the hospital, where one of the best medic neens of our time, your mother, attended to him. Apparently, your father was quite taken with her the moment he laid eyes on her, and promptly asked her out. Your mother, being of the same mind towards him, just as promptly accepted. Of course, it probably helped that your father was a bit of a heartthrob among the female population of the village. Sarutobi chuckled here for a moment, before continuing. They had a fairly good relationship going for almost a month, before the Uchiha Council got wind of it. They were, of course, incensed that one of their own was in a relationship outside of the bounds of what a proper Uchiha should be in. They were of the mind that Uchiha should marry nobility, or even within the clan, therefore keeping their own bloodline unpolluted, or some such nonsense. They expressly forbade your mother from seeing the yandere. Sarutobi took a puff on his pipe, and his eyes seemed to be a visage of almost anger before he schooled his expression once again and began relaying the rest of the story. It didn't really help that your mother wasn't exactly liked within the Uchiha inner circle either. According to them, Uchiha were supposed to be feared warriors, not medics of all things. Don't misunderstand me, either your mother was a very competent ninja, easily meeting the requirements for being a chunin, however her main role within most ninja-related things was to be the field medic, and because of this, she saved countless amounts of lives. To be honest, as a medic nin, she was second only to Tsunade, and even on par with Kakashi's own teammate, A girl named Rin, but that's another story. Of course, your mother and father had no intentions of obeying the stuck-up Uchiha Council, and as such, they continued their romance unabated, albeit in much more secret conditions. They would meet very surreptitiously, either at your father's own estate, or at some of the more private eating establishments, and you could often find them simply gazing at the stars under henge. They loved each other more than any other couple I've seen in a long time, and it only took about 4 months before they asked me to perform the marriage ceremony for them. Sarutobi by now was smiling a very warm and reminiscing smile, and you could see his eyes get slightly misty with unshed tears. The ceremony, if you could call it that, was very small. It was performed in this very office, with Jiraiya being the only witness. At that time, I was still retired, but being that I had once been a Hokage, I still had the power to marry people. It was short and concise, and they both told each other that when they felt they could, they would have a more grandiose ceremony. It was only a few months after that you were conceived. Sarutobi and Kakashi both shared a perverted giggle, while Iruka and Naruto shared a sweat drop. Naruto had to restrain himself from giving them both a well-deserved lump on the head. Seeing Naruto's irritation, Sarutobi cleared his throat and continued on. Life continued much the same for the next 8 months, with your mother somehow being able to keep her growing pregnancy a secret from everyone. It was during the 8th month that we received word of the Kyuubi reawakening, and storming a veritable warpath towards Konoha. As you can imagine, Minato became incredibly busy almost overnight, trying desperately to develop a way to kill the demon that was bearing down on us. He got very little sleep, and even less time to spend with his wife and soon-to-be-born son. It was nerve-wracking on him, but as the casualty reports kept coming in from outlying settlements, he had no choice but to devote himself fully towards its defeat. Sarutobi allowed himself a solitary tear at this point, and both Kakashi and Iruka shared in the old sage's sentiments. It was almost a full minute before the Hokage allowed himself to move on. A few days before the Kyuubi was to arrive at Konoha, your father finally came up with the idea for the Shiki Fujin. It was a jutsu sealing procedure that invoked the death god himself, Shinigami, to forcibly remove the very soul of the Kyuubi and seal it within the stomach of the death god forever. The price, however, was steep. It required for the user to give up their own life to an eternity of battle within the death god's stomach with the soul they sealed away. At first, everyone who was privy to the information, including Minato himself, was very reluctant to use it. However, it became very clear the closer the Kyuubi got to Konoha, that it was the only option. There was a problem, however. Well, a few of them, really. The first was that Minato wasn't exactly sure if the stomach of the death god could actually hold the extremely powerful soul of the Kyuubi, being that the Kyuubi was one of the strongest bijou in existence, and its own power rivaled that of the deity of hell himself. The second problem was that if the death god couldn't hold the soul of the Kyuubi, what could? It was an almost hopeless situation, and it was only a day before the Kyuubi was to attack that he was able to come up with the answer. Sarutobi steeled his expression, and steepled his hands on his desk at this, readying himself for the last part of the story that thus far had captivated his audience. He came up with the idea of the Jinchuriki. While Shinigami might not have been able to actively hold the Kyuubi, a human container, with the proper seals, could. At first, we were disbelieving. After all, humans weren't nearly as powerful as the Shinigami, and the idea of a human being able to hold a bijou that the death god could not was almost preposterous. However, Minato explained it very succinctly. The stomach of the death god would be forced to hold all of the Kyuubi, whereas a human container would simply be containing the Kyuubi's soul and power, while the body was given up. Essentially, this meant that while the power was still there, the means by which to channel it effectively was not. Power in and of itself is great, but without a means by which to use it, it becomes useless. The idea behind the Jinchuriki was to give that person the soul and the power of the bijou, and allow that person and that person alone to have jurisdiction over that power. The bijou, of course, would remain alive and have the actual power that they had once wielded, but the only way in which they could actually channel that power was either to, or with the permission of you. When the Jinchuriki eventually died, the power of the human soul and spirit, which have much more power than anyone gives them credit for, would then be used to kill off the soul of the bijou, completely erasing that bijou from existence. Naruto allowed this to soak in for a moment, while Sarutobi paused to refill his pipe. The very idea was absolutely mind-blowing, and if it weren't for the fact that he was currently living as a testament to it working, he wouldn't have ever believed that it would work. It was at this point that Naruto truly began to think of his father as a genius. Only someone with a staggering intellect and ability of forethought would really be able to pull something like that off. He was brought back to reality as the Hokage sat back down, and after taking a puff on his pipe, started again. The only problem with any of this was that because of the sealing processes used, unless it was used on a newborn, it would invariably kill the person used. This would have been fine, except that if the vessel were to be killed too soon, the sealing process wouldn't have enough time to mature, and it would fail, completely allowing the sealed bijou to reemerge, defeating the purpose of the jutsu in the first place. A newborn baby was still pliable enough to allow something like a sealing jutsu to take, as is evidenced by the impression seal. This meant that a newborn baby had to be sacrificed to this fate, without having any sort of choice in the matter. It was only a short time before Minato and Masao both made the decision that you, Naruto, were to be the one to be sealed. It was easily the hardest decision either of them had ever made. Not only would Minato be dying, but you, their son, would be cursed to the fate of being a Jinchuriki, and even though they hoped beyond hope that the village would see you as a hero, they were realists in the end. Because of this, Minato spent the entire last day he had alive devoting himself to finding various seals that would allow you to work in symbiosis with the Kyuubi, making you as powerful as possible, and hopefully giving you an easier life. He also fervently believed that the Kyuubi was not truly evil for some reason, which no one really understood. I only recently did any research into it, but I'd much rather the Kyuubi told you that than me. Naruto gave a small internal nudge to the fox, and he got the equivalent of a "we'll talk later" from the vixen. Temporarily shrugging it off, he returned his focus to the Hokage's dialogue. The Hokage sighed slightly, and his eyes became downcast. In the end, there were exactly 70 different seals Minato planned on using on you, ranging from a multitude of singular suppression seals, to the impression seal to keep you anonymous, as well as a number of chakra flow seals and other seals that, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure of myself. It was shortly after your father's research was completed that the Kyuubi finally met the walls of Konoha, and at almost that exact moment, your mother went into labor. The ninja of Konoha rushed out to meet the Kyuubi, mostly just to delay it. Your mother's labor was thankfully short, and as soon as you were born, you were rushed to a room below the Hokage Tower, where Minato began writing out the various sealing kanji to be used on you. It took him a total of 2 hours to complete the kanji, and by that time your mother had recovered, at least somewhat, from the ordeal of giving birth. With one final goodbye to you, your father rushed out to the battlefield, unawares that your mother had also gone to the battlefield to try to save lives. After this, it's basically as your history lessons indicate. Your father rode out on Gamabunta, used the Shiki Fujin, and then before he died, he transferred the soul and power of the Kyuubi into you, activating the other seals around you at the same time. The process itself took only about an hour, and then it was done. The Kyuubi was dead, you held what remained thereof, and your mother. Sarutobi shook his head and got a glazed-over look on his face. We never recovered your mother's body. As near as we know, she was killed while attempting to evacuate a load of wounded from the battle zone. Apparently there were witnesses to your mother's death, and she was declared as such shortly after the battle. At the time, there was a rumor that the Yondaime had a son, and that boosted morale for a little while, but because of his last wishes, I was forced to dispel that rumor, and tell them all that while the Yondaime had indeed had a son, you had been killed, even though you weren't. It was shortly after that you were announced as the container of the Kyuubi. It was a calculated risk. Either they would see you as a hero, or they'd curse you. Obviously, they didn't see you as the hero as your father and mother wanted, and I was forced to make the rule to forbid them from speaking of it. It was truly the saddest day the Leaf has ever endured. Sarutobi shook his head ruefully, and both Iruka and Kakashi had a stern look on their face. The atmosphere was, in a word, solemn. Naruto simply sat there, allowing himself the luxury of absorbing all of the information that he had been presented with. It was the stuff of tragic plays, not real life. He slumped in his seat and thought one thing: I have no family left alive, I'm all alone, completely alone. The Hokage took that moment to do what he does best: give Naruto hope. Naruto, I know this is a lot to take in. But if it's any consolation, there are things left for you to remember your parents by. They cared about you deeply, Naruto. More than you could ever know. They knew that you would have a hard life as such. They gave me dispense to see to it that when I believed you were ready, you were to inherit their legacy. Naruto's eyes widened slightly at this, and Kakashi's choked gasp was the only way that you could tell he was startled. The Hokage walked around his table to a small safe hidden behind a picture frame, and opened it, revealing a small set of keys in his hands. He walked to his intercom, and signaled to his secretary to cancel anything that he might have scheduled for the rest of the day, and motioned to Naruto to stand and follow him. Naruto, I believe that you are ready. The Hokage was being ambiguous again. Naruto hated when the old man was ambiguous. It meant that either Naruto was in for a great surprise, or there was something seriously wrong. Naruto doubted that there was anything wrong at the moment, aside from his entire life being turned upside down and unceremoniously fucked up, and that left him with the assumption that he was in for a surprise. Perhaps a good one, perhaps a bad one, but if there was one thing that Naruto hated, it was fucking surprises, and obviously the Hokage was trying to make whatever this was a huge surprise. Damn it. He had been walking through Konoha now for a good 10 minutes at a leisurely pace, flanked on either side by Iruka and Kakashi, with the Hokage leading the way. This has produced various reactions from villagers who had spied the procession, ranging from respect of the Hokage and outright ignoring Naruto, or simply a glare at Naruto, which, to date, had earned about 10 different villagers intense killing intent-laced stares from his 3 bodyguards. It was an interesting feeling, being stuck up for. He wasn't sure if he hated it because he hated being protected, or if he loved it because he liked having people that stuck up for him. It was certainly an interesting conundrum. Of course, there were the few that actually gave Naruto a smile, or at the very least, a nod of the head. Naruto mentally added those people to the list of people that he would protect if it came down to it. He would be a ninja for those that accepted him, not for those who didn't. To Naruto, It was just that simple. It was then that a particularly inebriated villager decided to get made an example of. A demon brought Miryu. I got something, hick for ya. He was probably in his 40s, and he certainly looked as though he hadn't bathed for months, probably used all his available money to buy booze, Naruto surmised. The other particular thing of interest was that he was unzipping his fly, and looked as though he was making to relieve himself on Naruto. This proved to be his undoing. Before Naruto had a chance to blink, Kakashi had pinned the idiot to an adjacent wall, and he noticed that Kakashi's forehead protector seemed to be uncovering his hidden eye, giving the drunk an unobstructed view of what exactly made Nin Kakashi such a feared name. He also noticed that Iruka had a kunai out, and even the Hokage looked pissed. Naruto couldn't exactly make out what was being said, but after about 15 seconds, he heard a blood-curdling scream from the drunk, before he slumped over. Kakashi dropped him from the wall, and casually strolled back to Naruto's side, as they began to move forward once again. Kakashi-sensei, what exactly did you do to him? Naruto was curious. Not exactly because he cared for the drunk, not at all. He simply wanted to learn whatever technique the gray-haired jounin had used for himself. Whatever it was, it seemed to be powerful. Kakashi gazed down at Naruto, with his forehead protector once again covering his left eye, before shrugging and turning his head back to looking in front of him. Just a particularly nasty genjutsu that made him believe that he had lost something very near and dear to every man. Naruto, Iruka and the Hokage all simultaneously let a small shiver overtake them, before making a mental note never to get Kakashi angry at them. Genjutsu or not, the trauma from losing one's own minimi was enough to make even the hardest of nin go into mental breakdown. Naruto shivered again. Oi, Kakashi-sensei, can I learn that genjutsu? Oh, and what did it have to do with you uncovering your left eye? He was genuinely serious about learning the jutsu, and he was also curious as to what exactly was under Kakashi's forehead protector that related to genjutsu. Kakashi seemed to stutter in his step ever so slightly, before regaining his lazy gait and shrugging again, while pulling out his trusty orange-covered book from his shuriken pouch. Well, I suppose you could learn that jutsu at some point. As to what's under my forehead protector, I'll show you later. Naruto seemed to be satisfied with that response, and turned back to facing the Hokage's back, before becoming increasingly curious as to what exactly was in that orange book. Unbeknownst to Kakashi, who was currently letting forth a slight perverted giggle, Naruto had created a Kage Bunshin and had it henge into a small fox. Its mission was to hop on Kakashi's shoulder and grab the little orange book, before retreating to the safety of Naruto's own shoulder and dispersing itself. Whatever that book was, it served to make Kakashi giggle profusely. He wondered what exactly could make the normally stoic-looking nin giggle. He figured that it had to be something particularly good to have that effect on such a nin as Kakashi. The fox Naruto hopped up on Kakashi's shoulders, and using its teeth, it snapped at the orange book, almost grabbing it, if it weren't for Kakashi unceremoniously punching the hinged Kage Bunshin square on its little fox head, dispelling it as easily as someone might squish a bug. Naruto was peeved for a moment, before realizing that he now, somehow, had in his head a small passage that his Kage Bunshin had managed to read from Kakashi's book. Naruto was somewhat distracted by the words that were now running through his head, but the Kyuubi wasn't as easily distracted. She started fervently working on analyzing exactly what this meant. But I'm a virgin, Akira, she exclaimed while trying to cover her particularly large assets from the now hungrily advancing man in front of her. I know, and that's what makes this so much more exciting. He grabbed one of her unusually large breasts, and began kneading it softly while his hand gradually made its way to a lower area. Without warning, Naruto stopped in the middle of the street, a blush that would make a tomato jealous now adorning his whiskered cheeks. The Hokage, Iruka and Kakashi all stopped to look at Naruto with puzzled expressions, while Naruto's own mind began furiously trying to reboot. Contrary to popular belief, Naruto wasn't nearly as naive about sex as people thought he was. After all, it required a large amount of research to create the Oryoku no Jutsu, and his sex ed as it were came almost exclusively from his experiences thereof. After about 30 seconds of Naruto not moving, Iruka began to actually get worried. He began walking over to the now only semi-conscious Naruto, before Naruto seemed to shake himself from his daze, and set his own gaze on the Cyclopean jounin. Kakashi-sensei, you really are a pervert, aren't you? Naruto watched as Kakashi's own eye widened, as Iruka shot a death glare at him. The Hokage seemed to be simply amused. Kakashi's own visage seemed to set itself into one of amusement rather quickly, however. Oh ho ho, do you like my book, Naruto? I can get you a copy, although it's technically illegal. Kakashi had a fake pensive look on his face, and he started tapping his chin, as if debating the merits of giving a 12-year-old a pornographic novel. As a testament to Naruto's increased mental prowess, however, he quickly put Kakashi in his place. Sure. Just have it delivered to my apartment, or something. Naruto had responded without missing a beat, and was now just as casually strolling along the path, leaving a half-stunned, half-amused Kakashi, a gaping Iruka and a chuckling yet exasperated Hokage in his wake. We'll have none of that. Although it is a good book, perhaps I can lower the age needed to buy such things. I am the Hokage. Sarutobi had the same fake pensive look on his face, and Kakashi joined him, both debating the merits of lowering the age of buying smut to 12. Needless to say, Iruka was just standing there, doing a rather interesting imitation of a fish, before the Hokage and Kakashi seemed to giggle to each other conspiratorially and resumed their positions on either side of Naruto. It had been a rather interesting diversion, Naruto decided. Before he could truly decide if he should be walking down the path of the pervert, a particularly feminine voice made itself known in his mind. If you enjoy being fertile, I would advise you not to become a pervert. Kyuubi sounded particularly peeved. Naruto decided that he rather liked his ability to procreate, and gave what amounted to a frantic nodding of the head to the Kyuubi, signifying his fervent acceptance of terms. One couldn't be too careful when it came to his equipment. Good. Now, while you were playing horn dog, I was busy analyzing the effects of the Kage Bunshin in regards to how you were able to discern what was in the book through the Kage Bunshin's eyes. If I'm correct, and I am, this has incredible implications for both training and learning. At the word training, Naruto perked up considerably. He allowed himself to zone slightly, simply willing his body to go to autopilot behind the Hokage, and let his consciousness float down to the Kyuubi's prison, if you could really call it that anymore. He found himself standing in the meadow he had created, watching as a much smaller version of Kyuubi in fox form was chasing a rather imaginary rabbit. Kyuubi was playing with, and stalking the rabbit, which seemed to be scared shitless. At the last moment, the rabbit hopped left when it should have hopped right, and the Kyuubi caught it deftly in her mouth. Seconds after that, however, the rabbit simply disappeared. Kyuubi gave what amounted to the fox's equivalent of a disappointed pout, before finally realizing that Naruto was standing with a rather amused expression on his face, looking directly at her. In a puff of smoke, she reverted to her human form, an embarrassed blush adorning her face. I may be trapped in here, but instincts and all that. She was scratching the back of her head in Naruto's own fashion, and Naruto bust out laughing, nearly falling on the ground. The idea of a 50-story tall demon fox chasing rabbits in a meadow was just hilarious, he decided. After a few minutes, Naruto noticed that the Kyuubi had fixed him with a particularly potent evil glare, and by pure force of will, he stopped himself from laughing, clearing his throat and eventually managing to look at Kyuubi without resuming his laughing fit. Right then. Basically what I've figured out boils down to the fact that whatever your Kage Bunshin experiences during its lifetime you too experience once the Bunshin has been dispelled. This means that if you have a few thousand Kage Bunshin practicing a technique, or training speed, or whatever for an hour, then when you dispel those Kage Bunshin, it becomes as though you have been training for a few thousand hours, within the span of an hour. Surely you can understand the implications. Kyuubi trailed off, seeing that Naruto's own expression was one of intense thought. She allowed herself a small smirk. Getting used to the idea of Naruto actually thinking was going to be interesting. In reality, Naruto was thinking about all of the possibilities that this opened up to him. A technique that ostensibly would take years to learn, could be learned in the space of a few months. If not shorter, he could drastically increase his speed, his stamina, his strength, his technique, everything in a much shorter amount of time. He could train for a few weeks, and have it come out as if he was training for an entire year. It was certainly an interesting proposition. Can you imagine a few thousand knees bombarding the Konoha archive and reading all the books in there in the space of a week or so? If they are sick of one of me, they'll be absolutely livid at 3,000 of me. Naruto couldn't help but cackled slightly at the idea of the villagers having to put up with thousands of him. It would be almost comical if it weren't so tragic that he was hated that much. Indeed. That's not a bad idea actually. I may be a font for certain sorts of information, but there's bits and pieces of information that you won't be able to learn from me that you'll have to get from the Konoha library. Being able to read most of the contents of the entire archive may be beneficial. Kyuubi seemed to be thoughtful for a second, before reverting her gaze to Naruto, and getting a look of almost annoyance on her face. Naruto was temporarily baffled. Speaking of me, is there a reason why you haven't summoned me yet? I may like it in here, but it's a far cry from being out there. Kyuubi had adopted an irritated pose, and her expression had dimmed considerably. Well, I haven't really asked anyone about the hand seals for the Kuchiyos yet. I'll do that when I get out of here. Naruto hoped that placated the female fox in front of him. He knew from prior experience how violent those of the female gender could be when they didn't get something they wanted. You had better. In fact, Kyuubi got a look of concentration on her face for a moment, before Naruto had to fight off a slight wave of dizziness, and realized that he was once again back in the real world. He got a slight mental nudge from the Kyuubi telling him to ask one of the nin that was currently walking with him what the seals were. Naruto knew better than to ignore the mental prodding. Hokage Ajisen, I was wondering, can you tell me what the hand seals are for the Kuchiyos no Jutsu? Naruto watched as the Hokage stiffened for a moment, before stopping and turning around to face him. His visage was slightly confused, as well as worried. Naruto, why on earth do you need to know the hand seals for the Kuchiyos? Kakashi and Iruka both had confused looks on their faces as well, and he vaguely wondered if they had forgotten his explanation already. He also noticed that they had reached a much less populated area of Konoha. They were about a mile from the Hyuga compound, if he estimated correctly. He couldn't make out even one soul other than the three he was with within the general area. Well, remember when I told you that I signed the Kitsune contract? Sarutobi nodded and took the pipe out of his mouth. Well, I just wanted to keep my end of the bargain. He noticed that the old man looked confused for a moment, before a slightly frightened expression formed on his face. Naruto vaguely wondered if perhaps the old man would forbid him from keeping his end of things. His fears were quickly dispelled. Naruto, if you trust her, then I suppose I should trust her, as well. Although no one, outside the three of us, is to know who she really is. You'll have to think up a backstory for her, and even a fake name. Naruto nodded slightly before Sarutobi sighed slightly and relented. Boar, dog, bird, monkey, and sheep. Naruto nodded and performed the hand seals, before biting his thumb and smearing the blood on his right hand. He slammed his hand onto the ground and with a slightly subdued voice said, Kuchios no Jutsu, Kyubi no Kitsune. Not a split second after he had said the name of the jutsu, a cloud of smoke rose from the spot where his hand had been, and obscured their vision. Naruto felt a tugging sensation from his mind, and felt a connection develop with something that was still enshrouded in the mist. His mind registered that he had to give that something an amount of chakra, and almost subconsciously, he directed his secondary chakra to the entity in the mist. He made sure not to give it any more than what a beginning academy student might have, judging that the something in the mist was most likely Kyubi. His suspicions were proven correct, as the smoke cleared away, revealing a corporeal version of the Kyubi in her human form, exactly as Naruto remembered her. While Naruto was not shocked, the other three in his procession most certainly were. Iruka had a look somewhere between shock and rage registered on his face, while Kakashi's own visible eye was glaring daggers at the vixen in front of him. Only the Hokage showed anything other than contempt, an expression signifying neutrality, or as close to it as you can get, making its way onto his elderly face. Before she could say anything, Kakashi stepped forward, along with Iruka, making an almost threatening gesture with their bodies' postures. Again, with the same subconscious nudge, Naruto attempted to send more chakra through to Kyubi through the link, but was surprised to find that she couldn't take more than a very small amount before something in his mind tripped that she was full. Naruto pondered this new development for only a moment, before taking action. With speed that he didn't quite know he possessed, he grabbed onto the Kyubi's shoulder, pulling her backwards behind him, while himself taking a posture with a kunai in hand, to defend her. Iruka's reaction was one of surprise, while Kakashi's was closer to frustration. Naruto himself simply strengthened his posture, while tightening his grip on his kunai. If Kakashi wanted Kyubi, he would be forced to go through him. Kyubi, on the other hand, was astonished. She had anticipated that the Hokage and the other two with him would be less than friendly towards her, but she had not at all anticipated Naruto's reaction. She had expected him to maybe verbally defend her, or simply allow her to defend herself, but she never in all her musings had she thought that Naruto himself would physically defend her. It was an odd sensation. On one hand, she was furious that she was unable to defend herself, but on the other hand, it felt nice to have someone there to defend her in her stead. She never even noticed that she had blushed rather profusely. Before the situation could get any closer to the breaking point, the Hokage stepped in. That's enough. Kakashi, stand down. Naruto, put your kunai away. We're all friends here, remember? The tension in the air was palpable, and it was only diffused by Kakashi backing down from his threatening posture, and Naruto stowing his kunai. The two locked eyes and eye for a moment, before both returning their gaze to the Hokage. Sarutobi simply sighed, muttering something close to, I'm getting too old for this shit. We can deal with any animosity once we get to our destination. For now, what say we simply make our way there, without any more diversions, eh? Iruka simply nodded his head curtly and resumed walking, while Kakashi did nothing but stow his hands in his pockets and speed up so that he was ahead of Naruto. Naruto resumed walking behind the Hokage, making sure to keep himself between Kakashi and Kyubi at all times. Kyubi herself was making sure to keep herself as close to Naruto as possible. Needless to say, the atmosphere remained tense, and no one spoke for the rest of the trip. It took them only about another 15 minutes of walking to reach their destination, and Naruto himself was surprised when they had reached the general area of the Hyuga estates. He was increasingly surprised when they arrived at the doorstep of a rather large house, directly adjacent to the Hyuga compound. Before Naruto could voice his questions, however, Sarutobi produced the same set of keys that he had taken out of the safe from one of his pockets. He proceeded to unlock the front door, and with a gentle push, the large oak door swung open. Sarutobi stood back, and made an ushering gesture to him, all the while maintaining an almost mischievous smile on his face. The second he stepped through the threshold, he couldn't help but gasp. The first chamber of the house was magnificent. The floor was a finely polished and stained wooden affair, giving the room an immediate home-type quality. In the middle of the room was an ornate oriental-styled rug, with various dragons seeming to coil around the tapestry, giving it an almost ethereal quality. The walls were paneled oak, stained to be a slightly darker color than normal oak. On the walls hung various famous paintings, interspersed so not as to be too full in the room. On the far wall sat a large fireplace, and on top of the mantel sat a sheathed katana, roughly 5 feet total in length, with a fine cloth-wrapped hilt that made up for at least 1.5 feet of the total length. The sheath was black, with a coiling red dragon surrounding it, and the curve of the blade suggested that it was a samurai-styled katana rather than a ninja-styled straight edge. The handguard was jet black, in contrast with the white ivory cloth of the handle. Underneath the katana sat a slightly smaller version thereof, only about 4 feet in total length, but with the same coloring and design. It too was curved in a samurai fashion, giving them a grace that drew the eye rather nicely. On the ceiling there was a rather simple chandelier that brightly lit the room, along with the help of 2 west-facing windows that allowed the sunlight to flow in freely. There was a cloth-draped couch, and what looked to be various recliners situated to either side of it, all of them facing the fireplace and the rug. All in all, it was a tremendously inviting scene, and it served to make Naruto almost misty-eyed. Naruto realized that he had been standing there for a few moments, and the Hokage was looking at him with a tremendously warm smile, while Kakashi and Iruka both had the same general reaction that Naruto did. Before Naruto could ask the Hokage whose house this was, Sarutobi motioned for Naruto to follow him once again, and they passed the threshold into what was the largest kitchen Naruto had ever been in. It had all the regular appliances of a normal kitchen, and the entire room seemed to be bathed in whites and beiges. The countertops were a beige marble, while the floor was a white marble. There was a massive refrigerator on the left of the room, and a large assortment of kitchen appliances on the right, including a huge stove, a microwave oven, convection oven, and deep fryer. He took special notice of the rather large liquor cabinet adjacent to the refrigerator, wondering just who kept so much liquor in their house. From the kitchen, they passed into a rather large dining room that seemed to be made for quite a few people. The table was long and narrow, and was lined on either side by plush chairs that resembled the recliners in the living room. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, once again brightly illuminating the room, and the design was very similar to the living room. The dining room segued into a much less formal living room setting, replete with an entertainment center with a large television and sound system, and a very large, curved and plushy couch that looked as though it was made for quite a few people. The room's decor was much less formal, no fancy paintings or fireplace, but the floor and walls were made of the same wooden combination, and the light in the room came from a very similar chandelier, although slightly dimmer than the one in the main living room. They then ascended a set of curved, wide stairs to the second story of the house. The stairwell turned into a hallway, with 10 doors on either side. One door seemed much further away from the other doors than the rest of them, and Naruto surmised that it was the master bedroom. They passed all of these rooms, and found another staircase, leading to the 3rd floor. When Naruto reached the 3rd floor, he nearly face-faulted as there was nothing there but a small hallway leading to a door. The Hokage strode up to the door, casually opening it, showing Naruto what the 3rd floor really was. He came out on the roof of the house, which overlooked most of Konoha. On either side of him were various types of patio furniture, along with, of all things, a small garden bed, which seemed to have all sorts of flowers and various foliage growing from it. It gave a grand view of Konoha and the rest of the estate, as well. Naruto noticed that the rest of the estate seemed to be rather large, probably close to 20 acres of forested and cleared area. In some of the clearings, there were training dummies and obstacle courses, and in some of the more forested areas, there seemed to be small trails leading through them, almost looking as though there was a large trail covering the entirety of the backyard. He also noticed that closer to the house, there was a second building, with a small steam stack. He assumed that it was a personal onsen. Whoever lived here was quite rich. With that, the tour was over, and the Hokage led the procession back downstairs to the main living room, motioning them all to take a seat wherever they wanted. Naruto and Kyuubi winded up on a 2-seat couch, while Kakashi and Iruka ended up in recliners. The Hokage took his seat on the couch. Silence hung for a moment, before Naruto dared break it. "Wow, this is an awesome house. Aji-san, who lives here?" With that, the Hokage seemed to chuckle slightly, and Kyuubi gave him an almost incredulous look, uttering her first words since being summoned out into the real world. A/N. While Kyuubi is corporeal, I will not be putting her dialogue into bold. Doesn't seem right. You haven't figured it out yet? The Hokage said that you were inheriting your parents' legacy, and then we came here. Think about it for a minute. Kyuubi's voice was the same alto tone it was inside the seal, and everyone besides Naruto was slightly stunned to hear that her voice wasn't some booming all-powerful voice that they thought it was. Naruto did take a moment to think it over, before it clicked. His expression was one of tremendous astonishment, and his mouth began to curve upwards into a large, beaming, genuine smile. This was my father's house, wasn't it? You said I was inheriting their legacy. Naruto looked as though he was almost about to tear up in joy before the Hokage smiled warmly at Naruto and pulled the pipe out of his mouth. Yes, Naruto. This was your father's house. Sarutobi paused for a moment, taking a puff on his pipe. It seemed as if he was relishing this moment for all it was worth. And now, Naruto, it is your house. Naruto gaped for a moment, before promptly fainting for the second time that day. The last thing he heard was the slight giggle of Kyuubi, and Iruka saying not again. Naruto had only fainted 3 times in his lifetime. The first was when he was 6. He had just learned from the old man that not only was he going to be enrolled in the ninja academy, but he was getting his own apartment as well. The shock from the overwhelming joy he had been feeling at the time was enough to make him faint, for the first, and he had hoped, the last time in his life. The second time was when his mother's name had been revealed. This had been only a few hours before, and hearing that he was an Uchiha was enough to make him faint for the second, and he hoped, last time. This would make the third. He had just been given a grand tour of a house that by any standards rivaled that of even the most prestigious citizen in Konoha. To top that off, he had just found out that said house was not only his father's old house, but was now, by rights of inheritance, his house. For a boy of 12 years, this information, especially considering the relatively shitty tenement he had lived in before, was enough to make him faint for his third and hopefully last time. It was by some stroke of luck that he managed to come to only a minute or two later. For some reason, the information given to him over the last day and a half was just now catching up to him. He supposed that he had simply been numb to it all before. After all, he had been living in a virtual hell for 12 years of his life, and within the span of about 36 hours, that hell had been dampened considerably. He was a different person. He knew his parents. He knew of the Kyuubi. He was to be trained by the Kyuubi. He had the possibility of developing the Sharingan. He had a house. A smile, a genuine smile adorned his face. Normally, his smiles were forced. He had long ago practiced and mastered the art of putting up a mask, an impenetrable emotional wall that nothing could break. His entire life had been lived under the shadow of a mask and under the stigma of a seal, multiple seals, if truth be told. In the space of a relatively small amount of time, that mask, along with one of the seals, had been shattered. He had ceased to be the orange-wearing freak that smiled all the time and wallowed in his own personal hell. He was becoming something different. He had an opportunity now, the ability, the means, the will, and the know-how to become something different. It was refreshing. It was incredible. It was enough to make Uzumaki Naruto smile, the first genuine smile that he had truly ever smiled in quite some time. It felt good. The occupants of the room that he was currently in noticed it as well. Iruka was truly happy for the boy. In the short amount of time that he had known Naruto, really known Naruto, he had come to know that rarely did the boy smile because he was happy. This smile had shone with mirth and a genuine happiness that he had seen on Naruto's face only a handful of times. It was truly a sight to behold. Kakashi hadn't really known the boy that long. True, he had saved the boy from angry mobs before, and even, on certain occasions, given the boy fruits and vegetables to eat when it was obvious that he was being malnourished, but in his time in ANBU, he really hadn't gotten the opportunity to know the boy any better than he did now. It didn't take a genius to know, however, that his smiles, up until now, were forced, and that this one, truly was not. It was enough to make Kakashi want to get to know Uzumaki. Wait, Hokage-sama, I think we forgot to tell him something. Kakashi was just now realizing that if everything he had been told was true, then calling Naruto and Uzumaki was well untrue. Oh? And what might that be, Kakashi-san? The Hokage was truly confused. What could they have possibly managed to forget? Well, if my sensei was truly Naruto's father, then doesn't that mean that his last name, he didn't want to just blurt it out, he would leave that for the Hokage to do? Sarutobi came to a sudden realization, a slightly embarrassed look flashing across his face. He had forgotten, after all of these years, that Yandame-kun's name was not Uzumaki. Naruto, apparently, had picked up on their conversation. Wait, what's this about my last name now? If you want me to start calling myself Uchiha, forget it. Naruto really didn't want to be seen as one of those stuck-up fuckwads. As he had said before, Sasuke was an okay person, but he was still a douchebag. The Hokage chuckled for a moment, before setting his gaze on Naruto's own confused visage. No, nothing like that, Naruto. Kakashi was simply saying that your last name truly is not Uzumaki. That was the family name of a woman who your father was close to, much like a sister, when he was young. He thought it fitting, at the time, to give you that name, as you could obviously either use Uchiha, or his real last name. It was the closest name to true family that you could get. Unfortunately, she fell out of contact with your father shortly after he became Hokage. Sarutobi took a puff from his pipe. Your father's real last name was Namikaze. This, of course, makes your real name, Namikaze Naruto. Naruto looked nonplussed at that admission from the Hokage, but his expression schooled itself soon after. Namikaze Naruto, interesting. I can assume that you don't want me going around calling myself that, right? Naruto was a bit anxious to be rid of his old lifestyle, but secrecy was still a need, at least until he could suitably defend himself from all of his father's old enemies. The Hokage nodded and got a slight stern look on his face. Indeed. Namikaze Minato, the Yandame, was well known, and well liked throughout the majority of the village. With your reputation going around calling yourself Namikaze Naruto would undoubtedly bring trouble that neither you or I need right now. In fact, all of the information that you have been made privy to in the last few days is to remain as classified as possible. There are some people that you can tell, for instance, your father was good friends with Hyuga Hayashi, your next-door neighbor. He was also rather good friends with the person that made those swords on the mantle, the Higurashi family. Over and above that, simply use your best discretion, but err on the side of secrecy. Naruto's own serious demeanor seemed to indicate that he readily accepted the old man's words. It wouldn't do to have him find out about his family, only to have his family's enemies come and kill him, after all. The Hokage took a puff on his pipe, and then turned to Naruto again, this time with a more subdued and caring gaze. As I was saying, however, before you fainted on us again, Naruto had the grace to look sheepish. This residence was your father's house. He believed in a minimalist approach to living, most of the time anyway, hence why the house isn't something sprawling like the Hyuga compound, or a small city, like the Uchiha complex. It's simply a house, with a lot of free space in the backyard, and enough living quarters for 10 to 20 people. Naruto looked slightly awed at that part. His apartment barely had living quarters for one. This would certainly be an interesting change. This house also has another level that none of us can enter, save for you, those you allow, and those of your blood. The basement, if you can call it that, is sealed off completely. No one, and I mean it, no one, aside from those who have given a portion of blood to the master security seal in the basement, can pass into the basement without being assaulted by various traps and fatal ninjutsu. At this, the Hokage seemed to get serious, as if the situation wasn't serious before. The reason for this is twofold. The first is that the basement is the repository of all of the jutsu that Minato learned and collected in his travels across the countries, in scroll form. This includes his own personal jutsu as well, which are extremely powerful in their own right. The second reason is that the basement is home to a rather complete library of various tidbits of information from the world. Books on ancient history, lost technologies, weapon schematics. Some of the most sensitive information in the world is in the basement of this house, and because of that, the security on the basement is absolutely second to none. The security on the Hokage Tower is nothing compared to the raw amount of traps and ninjutsu waiting for you if you try to break into the basement of this house. Naruto's jaw was rather close to being unhinged. Iruka and Kakashi both had an extremely astonished, yet serious look on their face. It was Iruka that spoke first. Hokage-sama, I understand what you're saying about the basement of this house, but shouldn't Naruto wait a few years before going down there? If the information is as sensitive as you say, then for someone who perhaps can't understand it, he trailed off. But his message was clear. He was worried about Naruto possibly hurting himself with the information contained in the basement. It was very typical of Iruka and one of the reasons why Naruto trusted Iruka implicitly. No matter what he did or said, you knew that he had the best interests of Naruto in mind. The Hokage just seemed to chuckle slightly. No need to worry, Iruka-kun. Most, if not all of that information is sealed in such a way that it takes more sealing knowledge than Naruto possesses to unveil them. By the time he does know enough to unwrap them, he should be old enough to understand them, as well as understand their importance. Iruka still seemed worried, but he did look as though the Hokage's reassurances did just that, reassure him. Naruto was curious about a few things though. So there are a lot of jutsu down there, and scrolls, just waiting to be learned, right? Those aren't sealed up, right? He was hoping beyond hope that the jutsu in the basement library were open to him. The Hokage chuckled at Naruto's eagerness to learn, and shook his head ever so slightly. The most powerful of the jutsu are sealed up. You won't be able to learn them for quite some time. However, most of the genin, chunin, and some jounin level jutsu are completely open for learning. If I remember correctly, your father's personal jutsu are not sealed either. Although, with all of the jutsu downstairs, it could take you decades to learn them all. I would start small and work your way up. Naruto looked almost put out for a moment, before he brightened considerably. Oh yeah, I wouldn't worry about that. My training method should allow me to learn a few lower level jutsu a day, and a higher level jutsu in a few days. Hell, I should be able to master most of the jounin level jutsu after a few months. The three nin in the room were gawking openly at him after this bold statement, and for good reason. He was talking about speeding up his training by years. Naruto was exaggerating, of course, but they didn't know that. Well, they didn't until Kyuubi decided to butt in. You're overestimating yourself, Naruto. The training technique we thought up will invariably speed up your learning processes, but before you can learn any of those jutsu, you have to work on the basics first. Chakra control, stamina, speed, accuracy, strength. You have to train your body and your mind before you can train your jutsu. Naruto gave Kyuubi his best attempt at a withering look, but she just brushed it off as though it were nothing. The Hokage regained the use of his vocal faculties first. If I may ask, what exactly is this training technique you have thought up for yourselves that will speed up your training by such a drastic amount? He was looking at Kyuubi now, giving her a stern look, as if daring her to say the wrong thing. She simply smirked and waved her hand dismissively. It's a product of the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Whatever the Kage Bunshin experiences within its lifetime is passed on to the original when it is dispelled, right? Well, considering that with my help, Naruto can make literally thousands of Kage Bunshin at a time, it's not hard to figure out that it can be an absolute godsend when it comes to training. What would take years to learn can be learned in the space of a month. What would take a month to learn can be learned in the space of a week. What would take a week to learn would take a day or so, etc. The Hokage looked almost awestruck, something that you don't often see on the face of the strongest ninja in the village. Iruka and Kakashi both had looks of intense thought on their faces, as if trying to find deception in the Kyuubi's words. That is tremendously ingenious. The ramifications of such a thing. The Hokage trailed off, getting a thoughtful look on his face for a moment, before seeming to reach a conclusion. But I assume that Naruto is really the only person able to do such training. No one else has access to such absolutely gigantic chakra reserves. He kept his pensive look for a few more moments, before chuckling and almost outright laughing. Naruto, you just keep surprising me. He reached over from his spot on the couch to ruffle Naruto's hair, which gained a slightly sour look from the boy, before he gained a sheepish grin. It was touching, until Kakashi decided to speak his mind. Hokage-sama, you have to be aware that this could simply be a trick. There could be an unknown side effect to the jutsu, or using her chakra before Naruto uses it. I suggest we test it in a controlled environment to assure that the Kyuubi isn't simply trying to gain her freedom. Kakashi was by this time glaring daggers at Kyuubi, who was glaring right back. At that moment, she truly wished she had access to all of her chakra. Before Naruto could step in to defend her, the Hokage held his hand up in a gesture that Kakashi knew meant to stop what he was doing. He complied, albeit reluctantly. The Hokage seemed pensive for a moment, before gaining a serious demeanor and turning to address Kyuubi. Kyuubi, I have wondered 12 years ago. Minato-kun told me that he believed you were not the evil demon that people portrayed you to be. I have done some limited research into the subject, which has yielded some rather interesting results. I could elaborate on my own, or you could be so kind as to explain to all of us what exactly happened to lead up to the events of 12 years ago. His face was set in stone, schooled into complete neutrality. It was a look that Naruto had seen only a few times on the old man's face, and it usually was there to hide his true emotions during sensitive diplomacy. The few times he had seen that face, it had been right before someone who had been accused of hurting him had been outed as doing just that. It was the ultimate in a detective's face. Naruto sent a mental nudge to Kyuubi, letting her know that he was ready to just tell them all to fuck off, but interestingly enough, she simply gave him what amounted to a shut up and listen. He decided to do just that. To explain everything, I need to go back to the beginning of my existence. You see, I was not always a demon fox. In fact, when I was first created, I was simply an extremely powerful angel, I guess you could say, created by a much higher power than any of us, including myself, can comprehend. At the time, I was simply a spirit. I had no true sentience to speak of. I was simply another creation of God that did his bidding, without a thought as to the ramifications. I had no awareness, only vague memories, and no real sense of self. It was an interesting existence, to say the least. Here, she trailed off slightly, allowing the occupants of the room to absorb this information. However, something changed. To this day, I'm not sure what it was, but I turned from a pseudo-sentient spirit into something much closer to what I am today. We gained sentience, we gained memories, we became individual. We also became something of a legend. I, along with 8 other spirits, became what are now known as the Bijou. Our purpose was ingrained into our very existence: keep the order, keep the balance. That's exactly what we did. We kept humanity in check, making sure that humans did not gain too much power, nor did they destroy themselves, or fall victim to more malicious forces. That was our job, for tens of thousands of years. However, to us, it seemed a much shorter span of time. We existed in a different way than you humans do, somewhat outside of space-time. Because of this, even if we have existed as sentient beings for thousands of years, we have only matured, so to speak, to the level of maybe 50 to 70 of your human years, although time doesn't have nearly the effect on us as it does you. Naruto gaped slightly at that. His perception of Kyuubi as an ancient beast were now in question. She may be physically old, but mentally he realized with a start that she was much like him in that sense. He had been forced to grow up rather quickly, gaining a potential for maturity at age 12 that many 30-year-olds didn't quite possess. She, on the other hand, had been alive for tens of thousands of years, and yet was only as mature as a normal 50-year-old. They were both young and old in completely different, yet similar ways. Kyuubi sighed and seemed to gain an almost defeated pose. Of course, as happens with most creatures of power, we became arrogant. We became insolent. We had tremendous power, immortality, and a startling amount of free reign in our actions, and yet we began to crave more. You've undoubtedly heard of the proverb, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely? Well, the Bijou are the very essence of that proverb. We were given almost infinite power, and most dangerously free will. Because of this we became corrupted. In a fit of arrogance and petulance that to this day I am ashamed of, she stopped, and to Naruto's and everyone's amazement, she wiped a tear off her cheek. She stayed quiet for a few moments, before mustering the necessary will to carry on. We renounced ourselves from the grace of God himself. In essence, we shirked our duties. In return for the ability to completely and totally guide our own paths, we kept our power. We kept our abilities. In essence, we became the most dangerous beings possible. Terrible power, unquenchable thirst for more power, and a free will without a developed conscience. We did whatever we wanted, when we wanted, in whatever manner we wanted to do it in. It was fun, I suppose, but in the end, none of this gained us any more power. To gain the power that we so desperately wanted, we resorted to something that eventually led to the events in Konoha. We sought out the Fallen One himself. The Hokage seemed to gasp, while Iruka and Kakashi simply stared, confused. Naruto was just as confused, but he knew Kyuubi well enough to know that an explanation was forthcoming. The realm of Makai Hell. Residence of Satan himself. In an unrivaled act of stupidity, we believed that Satan, who himself was no more than a fallen angel, could give us power. Of course, Satan, being who he is, jumped at the chance, using his power to summon us into his realm, where, over the course of about 10,000 years, proceeded to, for lack of a better word, corrupt us. We had more power, Yes, but at the expense of everything that made us exactly what we were. We lost our conscience, we lost our free will, and while we retained our sentience, she trailed off, as if searching for a possible explanation. It was as if we were trapped in our own bodies, looking out and screaming at ourselves to stop. We knew what we were doing, we did it without question, and without any sort of hesitation. Satan could not completely purge our God-given gifts of conscience, free will, and memory. What he managed to do, however, was to trap them. He used our physical manifestations against us, warping our bodies to work directly against our spirits. Before we even knew what happened, we had become physical manifestations of death, destruction, and mayhem. We had been reborn, and taught the very essence of evil, but we still retained ourselves, somewhere, within our spirits. Here, she stopped and looked at Naruto. I told you that I learned quite a bit about seals and whatnot where I came from. That's essentially true. I was reborn in hell. I learned all about those seals and other such things there, and I continue to retain that knowledge. Naruto gulped slightly, and nodded. It was certainly no comfort that he had a hellborn being in his belly. Kyubi returned her gaze to the Hokage. After that we were simply used. We were transported back to your realm, and used as weapons of mass destruction. Different creatures attacked different centers of humanity. I simply happened to come to Konoha. For the first time, she smiled while relaying the story. By an act of mercy, when your Hokage used the Shiki Fujin, my corporeal body was completely destroyed, along with all of the warped and twisted motives thereof. I was granted freedom, even in captivity. As I am now, I am no more than a tremendously powerful spirit kitsune. The body I am in now is a product of a chakra construct, which is why I cannot take too much chakra in this form yet. I will live out my days with Naruto, and when he dies, I die and inevitably face my maker. Naruto will be wholly unaffected by my own judgment. That is why I am helping Naruto. His father sacrificed his own son to give me freedom, even if it is technically imprisonment. If anything, Naruto has my help and my training, by virtue of me being, for lack of a better term, guilty. I was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to imprisonment for life. All I can do is try to make my cell a little bit more inviting, eh? She chuckled slightly here, before she fell quiet, allowing the occupants of the room to realize the absolute silence that permeated the room. It seemed as though no one was even breathing. Kyubi added her last bit of information. I suspect that the reason your Hokage believed me to be not evil, as it were, is simply by deductive reasoning. The Bijou were infamous, everyone knew of us, and when we disappeared, and then just as suddenly reappeared as evil pseudo-demons, I believe he may have had an inkling as to what actually was going on. Of course, 10,000 years in Makai is the rough equivalent of about 5 years in your plane of existence. Space and time are completely different when it comes to realm hopping. We were not nearly as cruel before we disappeared as we were when we came back, and I believe that the Yondaime may have had a hunch that something had happened to corrupt us. That's probably why he placed so many symbiotic seals on Naruto. He believed, correctly, that when I finally gave up on being the demon I thought I was, that I would help Naruto grow and mature. He truly was gifted when it came to forethought and preparation. Everyone in the room was stunned to silence, and even though they didn't quite understand it, it seemed as though it explained, quite well, exactly why the Yondaime had not simply sealed away the Kyubi permanently. Naruto was strangely contented by the explanation from the demon, no, from the Kyubi. It served to explain the entire situation, and it did so in a way that allowed him closure, for lack of a better term. His parents, and truthfully, Naruto himself, were part of something larger than any of them could fathom, and the feeling that he couldn't do anything to change his situation was almost comforting. It gave him the ability to simply move on. Naruto smiled and the Kyubi smiled back, her own grin showing of gratitude. He was happy, truly, unbelievably happy. Whoever said ignorance was bliss certainly hadn't been in his shoes. It's amazing what information, specifically the truth, can do, Naruto contemplated. They had been sitting here for the better part of an hour after the end of Kyubi's story, and surprisingly, both Kakashi and Iruka they had made strides towards forgiving the Kyubi for her actions. Naruto thought that perhaps forgiveness would never completely come, but it was better than the situation they had before. They had made small talk for the rest of the hour, discussing various things that Naruto didn't exactly need to be proactive in. His own inheritance of his father's complete estate was to be transferred into his own bank accounts as soon as the old man made it back to the tower, and apparently, it was quite sizable. He certainly wouldn't be swimming in money, but he also wouldn't really have to worry about money at all for a few years, at the very least. They had also discussed the swords on the mantle of the fireplace. That had been something Naruto listened to intently, as the Hokage described both swords in great detail. The larger of the two was the sword that Minato actually used, while the smaller one was used as a display piece mostly. Both of them, however, were in battle condition, ready to unsheath and use at a moment's notice. The Hokage had suggested that Naruto take the smaller of the two and use it to learn his sword style with, seeing as how the larger of the two was slightly taller than Naruto. Naruto had readily agreed, and the sword was now resting happily on Naruto's left hip, for a quick across-the-body right-hand draw. The swords didn't have any special attributes or anything aside from the fact that all it required to repair the blade, and completely clean it, was an infusion of chakra. It didn't do much in battle, but it made maintenance much easier. The blade itself, when unsheathed, was unremarkable for a sword, but one could tell with even the slightest glance that it was a high-quality blade. The blade shone with a mirror polish, and when Naruto ran his index finger across the sharpened edge, it drew blood without even a hint of pressure needing to be applied. It was tremendously well made. The first time Naruto had held it, he had noticed how incredibly well balanced it was, and that the longer than usual handle gave him much more flexibility with the blade, allowing him to shift weight and power with it much more easily. In all, it was a perfect blade for learning and using. Ryuta Kyuubi had said as much. Naruto was lost in some of his own thoughts when he noticed both Kakashi and Iruka stand to leave. He stole a glance at the grandfather clock in the corner, and noted with a start that it was almost 6 o'clock in the evening. Time had gone quite quickly. Shifting his glance back at his visitors, he noticed Iruka walking towards him, undoubtedly to impart some morsel worldly wisdom. Naruto, first off, I'm glad that you believe me to be so trustworthy that you would share these things with me. I'm glad that you have your past, a family, and that you're finally getting what you deserve. Iruka paused here for a moment, before his face set itself in an almost fatherly visage. Secondly, don't let it go to your head. With that, Iruka gave Naruto a playful bop on the top of the head, and unceremoniously ruffled his hair. They both leaned in for an unceremonious hug, and after a few goodbyes, Iruka was out the door. He then noticed that Kakashi was staring at him intently. Naruto, he trailed off, as his gaze met the floor. He couldn't believe that this guy was being sheepish. Naruto, thank you for giving me a piece of my sensei back. I know that you don't want to be known just because of your father. I'm the same way, but know that if you ever need anything, you can come to me. I owe your father quite a bit, and since he isn't around anymore, that's passed on to you. Naruto gave a grin, and a nod of the head, and Kakashi's one visible eye conveyed that he was indeed smiling underneath his mask. Before Kakashi could make his way to the door, however, Naruto thought of something. Now, Kakashi-sensei, you never did show me what was under your forehead protector. Kakashi seemed to be pensive for a moment, before shrugging, and lifting his forehead protector to show a fully developed Sharingan staring back at Naruto.